Hey guys. Here is part 2 of what if Naruto and Team 7 were actually trained by Kakashi. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 13, Bunshin Phobia. Zabuza grunted with exertion as he swung his blade at Kakashi, who grunted back as he dodged. Both shinobi were exhausted, and both were terribly wounded. Kakashi was wheezing with every move, one hand never leaving his side, desperately trying to keep himself together long enough to outlast his foe. He was fairly certain his lung had been nicked when Zabuza managed to hit him, but the damage was not crippling, not yet. But moving too hard and too fast or even breathing fully could quite possibly make the damage worse, and with that in mind, he played the waiting game carefully, using the least amount of effort possible to keep ahead of Zabuza's blade. Zabuza was no better. His left arm ached terribly from the strain of wielding his sword alone. His right arm, what was left of it, burned with a deep inner fire that slowly and inexorably sapped his strength with each drop of blood lost. His back was dominated by one giant burn that ran from his charred belt to his neck, and that weeping injury was making every breath a torment. Every time he lifted his sword, his entire back cracked quietly, his charred skin oozing that much more. Kakashi drew his strength from desperation. Zabuza drew his strength from humiliation. After the last decoy had detonated and nearly taken Zabuza's arm, Tazuna had fled into his house. Zabuza followed, screaming, howling in fury and pain. In those early moments of the fight, nothing could stop his blade, powered by adrenaline and fury. Each step was accompanied with a wild swing, the heavy blade passing through the front door, the walls, and the tables and chairs of the kitchen in succession. Tazuna ran through the entire house, desperately avoiding each swing with an agility fueled by terror, eventually jumping out of Inari's bedroom window when he became cornered. He landed, and noting the lack of Kakashi bleeding out in the grass, he turned as Zabuza landed behind him. But he was not afraid. He was grinning, his hand already formed into the seal of the snake. Zabuza froze, his eyes bulging in disbelief and pain. "No!" he growled, taking a step towards Tazuna. "You're bluffing." Tazuna's eyes darted to his foe's feet, measuring the distance between them, the huge grin still plastered across his face. Zabuza stared at the man before him, then laughed, a loud howling chuckle that echoed across the waters of the lake. "I'll admit you ran me ragged. You've likely cost me a literal arm, bridge builder, and it looks like your ninja ally has escaped my wrath as well." He hefted his blade to his shoulder, sweat-covered muscles bulging with the strain, and he nodded. "I'll grant you a quick death for such an incredible fight. But you missed one small detail in your attempt to trick me into sparing your life." Tazuna froze, eyes wide, a small drop of sweat rolling down his face. "I can see you're scared that your bluff won't work, something no real ninja would show. You're not Kakashi's clone." Zabuza was mid-lunge when he heard the sound, a high-pitched chirping noise, and he ducked into a roll, hissing as his own body weight pressed down on his mangled arm. He rose with his back to Tazuna in time to see Kakashi's lightning-shrouded fist hit the ground, blowing a small hole in the dirt. Then he felt Tazuna land behind him, and heard the dreaded sound of an explosive tag priming. Now, the usual grace of a ninja battle had devolved into a slugging match. The same cycle, over and over. Zabuza would make an attack, or maybe two, until his one working arm gave out. Kakashi would throw himself away from the attack, his wheezing getting worse. They would then glare impotently at one another, gathering the energy for another round. Kakashi managed a small chuckle eventually. "We both know this is a stalemate. We're both waiting for our genin to show up and tip the balance. I would offer to give us both a break, but you'd only try to kill me the moment I showed any sort of trust. So we keep this up over and over, like a pair of morons in a shonen manga. Sounds like a silly way for us to carry on. Want to take a break?" Zabuza crouched over his sword and glared up at his opponent, who was on one knee and ready to jump aside in case Zabuza had gathered enough energy to take another swing. Zabuza's ragged breaths turned into a ragged chuckle, and to Kakashi's surprise he nodded, dropped his sword, and staggered a few feet away. Kakashi moved away slightly as well and slumped gratefully to the dirt. After a few moments of panting, he pulled out a small tin of antibiotic salve and rubbed it into his wound with a hiss. He then closed the tin, then casually tossed it to Zabuza, who flinched slightly and blocked it with his tattered arm, snarling at the sudden pain. Kakashi snorted. "If I had anything like that, I'd have left it on the ground while we were rolling around playing manga battle. It's an antibiotic, with a mild pain reliever mixed in. It won't get us on our feet, but it'll help a little with the pain, and if you end up winning or this becomes a draw, it might save your arm." He gave a small chuckle and a small shrug, sparing his injured side. You'll have to find a nice young woman to rub it on your back, though. Zabuza chuckled back at the mental image, and after a moment of thought, he reached out and grabbed the tin from where it had landed. He popped it open with one hand, cracking the tin in half with the effort, and started snarling to himself as he rubbed it into his damaged arm. "You're an odd one, Kakashi-san," he said once he finished, his voice rumbling. "I've never known a ninja to be quite so friendly to a foe who intends to kill them painfully as soon as they can." Kakashi nodded at that. "That's because I know two things you do not." That got a snort. "Enlighten me, O wise one." Kakashi raised a finger. "1. We're not foes now, even if you don't get that yet. You're not getting paid, ergo, you gain nothing by this fight. Thus, we are not foes." Zabuza rolled his eyes and waved his good hand for the other shinobi to continue. Kakashi raised a second finger. 2. We're waiting for our genin to arrive and finish this fight in our stead. And I know, beyond doubt, that mine will win. At the very least, the two who are with me. The third is busy elsewhere." Zabuza pointed and laughed at his foe. "My minion has a bloodline limit that is unstoppable. I've never seen him lose to an enemy." Kakashi gave his own little snort, which devolved into a giggle. "You know all those clones that have been working you over with explosive tags, pretending to be Tazuna, and otherwise messing with you?" Zabuza nodded, his jaw clenched tight. "Those weren't my clones." Haku landed with a thud against a tree and pushed, lunging back along his previous line of flight with Saban flying out to either side, but the black-haired shinobi he was up against took the poorly aimed strikes and met him head-on, kunai in each hand. Damn him, Haku thought. He had already tried to recapture his opponent twice in his ice dome. The first time, the shinobi had blown through one of the panes of ice with a well-placed stream of flame, lighting Haku's sleeve on fire and doing so. The second time, Haku had made the panes thicker, but that had proven too slow to be effective, and his foe had simply jumped out before the dome was complete. And as much as it burned him to admit it, without his mirrors, Haku was not fast enough to stop his red-eyed foe. They met and parted with a clashing of kunai, Haku's speed allowing him to avoid Sasuke's attack, while the Sharingan allowed Sasuke to do the same in spite of his slower reaction time. It was a stalemate, and with a final futile toss of Saban, Haku turned and fled as fast as he could for the bridge builder's house, where a second explosion had happened some time ago. His foe shouted in surprise and started to chase, but by then, Haku had enough of a lead to keep ahead of any attack. After a few moments, Haku landed on a branch some ways away, listening carefully to the sound of his not-so-distant pursuit, then gasped in shock as the bushes below him parted, revealing his master. He was dragging his blade in the dirt, one arm reduced to a stump. His breath was ragged, his eyes focused only on his feet as he trudged along. The sound of the genin behind him increased in pace, and Haku knew the boy had seen his master and him. He jumped down and tucked himself under his master's good arm. "We must flee, master. I have you." The arm tightened around Haku's throat, and a chill went down his spine as his master looked at him and gave him a huge grin, so out of place on such a stern man. "And I have you, Haku," said Uzumaki Naruto. Kakashi perked up slightly. He could hear the sound of 3 young people leaping through the trees, and could not imagine any circumstance or combination of allies and enemies that did not indicate he had won. He perked up even more when, from the direction of town, he heard a 4th set of footsteps, slow and almost inaudible. "I think we're about done here," he said. Zabuza grunted, still leafing through the orange book that Kakashi had tossed him earlier with an outraged expression. He carefully closed the book and tossed it back to Kakashi. "I cannot believe nobody ever took up your offer to look inside this book. It was like a window into your mindset, Kakashi-san." Kakashi resisted the urge to giggle as he rose, if only to spare his side, then, after a moment, he walked over and offered Zabuza a hand. "No hard feelings or anything," he said calmly, looking Zabuza in the eye. Zabuza returned the look for some time, then grunted and took the help up. Naruto and Sasuke landed on the ground at the edge of the forest moments later, Haku between them. They began to walk forward, even as Haku started to run, hand dipping into pockets. Kakashi noted his student's lack of concern and decided simply moving away slightly would suffice, just in case. He was proven right a moment later, when Haku's hands came out bearing bandages, pastes, and herbs. "Haku!" snarled Zabuza, freezing the young man in his tracks. "You lost?" Haku fidgeted slightly, looking down at his feet, looking for words to say. His eyes widened when he heard Naruto start stomping forward. "He surrendered, you idiot, on condition of being able to minister your injuries." Naruto was fuming, his face red, his eyes wild. "He was so worried about your life and saving your arm that he stopped fighting. After he woke up from the headlock." mumbled Sasuke quietly to Kakashi, who shushed him. Zabuza looked fit to start attacking anew when Haku stepped up and grabbed him by the shoulders. Zabuza-san, you risk losing your arm, and you've already lost the pay from this mission. They told me when I surrendered. Gato is probably already dead. Zabuza opened his mouth to argue, then shut his mouth and looked at Kakashi, who nodded and pointed in the direction of the slowly approaching footsteps. I still do not approve of your surrender. He loaded his voice with menace and fury. You should, snarled Naruto, stepping up to glare at Zabuza. Do you know what got him? Not my clone and attack. Not Sasuke's ice-breaking attack. The thing that got him was a simple henjivyu, crippled and unable to flee. He literally put my arm around his shoulders, without even thinking of the possibility of it being a trick. He fell for the stupidest trick ever, out of worry for you. Zabuza looked down at his minion, who nervously nodded in agreement to the story. You're an idiot, Haku, and far too soft. Haku nodded quietly. Apologize, Naruto hissed. Zabuza snarled and stepped forward, good arm raised, even against the pressure of Haku holding him back. Naruto snarled and stepped forward as well, his hands formed in the snake's seal. Every person in the clearing froze, nobody faster than Zabuza. You must be blue. Zabuza stopped speaking, literally swallowing his words, and looked around. Everyone looked terrified. Haku was standing, arms out, trying to shield Zabuza with his small, thin body. The little black-haired genin looked concerned, and was staring at the blonde with his eyes glowing red, gaze moving as he tried to find a way to stop his teammate. And Kakashi? Kakashi looked worried, deeply worried. He caught Zabuza's eye and shook his head. Zabuza lowered his arm. I am sorry. Each word was a growl, dragged out from the depths of his soul, a chain lined with glass shards and fish hooks ripped out of his lungs and mouth. You are soft, Haku. But not an idiot. Naruto nodded and stepped away, arms dropping, his face going from scowl to smile in moments. He walked away, waving to his sensei, who swiftly cuffed him and lectured him on suicide bombs and why not to use them. Sasuke rolled his eyes and started looking in the direction of the little pink girl who was approaching, a bag over her shoulder and a tired, grim look in her eye. And Zabuza watched as Haku dressed his wounds, the boy's face slightly pink and a smile fixed on his face, not the slight thing he wore like a piece of clothing, but a genuine smile. Zabuza sat in the dirt, letting Haku reach his broad shoulders, and thought. The small camp in the wreckage of the bridge builder's home was a fairly cheerful one the next morning. Early on, it had been tense, as Sakura explained her mission and delivered to Zabuza proof that he would not be getting paid by Gato, ever. Zabuza had been furious, but had calmed himself slightly when Sakura had also pointed out that Gato had a large safe in his office, and then pulled out the man's keyring. Haku had looked at Zabuza, then Kakashi, then excused himself to look for herbs with Sakura. Nobody was fooled, and nobody objected. Hours later, they had returned, Inari and Tsunami with them and a veritable pharmacy in hand. They had paid a quick visit to Gato's office, passing easily through what few guards remained. Once his death was known, Gato's men had fallen into fighting and looting. Most of the town had been spared, as most of the wealth of the land had been kept away from the townsfolk. The safe had been filled with money, and more than money, far more. Bearer bonds, property deeds, account information, and an impressive collection of blackmail material had been within. They had looted it all, then dropped by a doctor's office to throw money at him and take his entire stock. They picked up Inari and Tsunami on the way out, and aside from one short and simple fight with a pair of would-be thugs, they had returned unmolested. Tsunami had been crushed to see the ruins of her house, until Sakura had handed her a small bag and whispered something to her. She opened the bag, her face quizzical, then she quickly and nonchalantly stashed the bag on her person. Inari, for his part, had been quite frightened of Zabuza until the big man had growled theatrically at the little boy only to be silenced brutally by a swat on the back from Haku. Haku, with some basic medical training, had managed to fix up Zabuza's hand well enough that he could expect at least a partial recovery. Kakashi's side had been worse, but without any major internal injuries, it too was on the mend. He would not heal well in the field, but he was mobile, which was all he needed. But the greatest surprise for Zabuza was when Naruto had taken the entire haul from Gato's office and dropped it in front of him. Zabuza looked at the pile, then up at the other shinobi around him. Sakura already got her pay for Gato, said Kakashi casually, face buried in his book. None of us were hired to do anything about the situation here, just defend the bridge builder, so we have no claim on it. But those nefarious Nukenin, they have all sorts of sticky fingers, so who knows what they made off with in the chaos. Zabuza raised his hand ready to push the pile away, but Haku's hand closed over his. We'll do anything to reach our goals. slay anyone, do unspeakable things. Except lucky happenstance disguising well-intentioned charity even. He turned to the other shinobi and bowed. Thank you? Zabuza nodded to his minion, then to the others. Thank you. The glass was a little less sharp this time, the fish hooks fewer. He even felt, for just a moment, a little warmth inside, which he assumed was heartburn until much further in the future. That night, Kakashi had quietly talked with Zabuza, away from camp. They spoke on several subjects. On how Gato was a fool for his heavy-handed policies. On how, with all of his men running amok, someone offering protection could make a mint, especially if they accepted future payment, with the sudden economic upswing the town should have soon. On how certain people needed experience being a good leader before they took over entire nations if they wanted to avoid the same mistakes that drove them to choose that mission. On how some further opportunities might crop up in the future in another land that famously valued Kekkai Genkai and other unusual powers, and could always use an experienced shinobi. Zabuza was up all night, deep in thought. One thing I must ask, Kakashi. They all stood on the path leading out of town, days later. Kakashi's side had mended enough to travel, and Zabuza had been good to go for a while, but remained on the insistence of Haku. Kakashi turned to look at the two former foes, his single eyebrow raising. I've yet to see the real Tazuna. I must know. Where did you hide him? Kakashi grinned. Tazuna sighed and poked at his food. He was quite tired of ramen, but he was also poor, and Naruto had convinced the shopkeeper to cut him a deal when his clone had escorted him back to the village after the two shinobi in the puddle had attacked. Another bowl? Asked Tochi from behind the counter, grinning. Tazuna sighed again. He'd even run out of sake. Chapter 14, Decompression. It was a long week before the team managed to return to Kanahigakure. Kakashi was nowhere near healthy for the trip. Zabuza had come very close to delivering a deadly blow in his attack, and no amount of traditional medical care would heal Kakashi in the short time they had to rest. Haku had no medical jutsu, only basic field medic training. Kakashi's side had started bleeding after only a mile, and they had to stop frequently to rebind his wounds. Initially, despite his injury, the walk had been cheerful enough. Naruto had been crowing without pause, and rightly so, having finished an easily A-rank mission the first time out of town. He had regaled the others with his every experience, as seen mostly by his clones, at the top of his lungs. Sasuke had managed to smile at a few of the stories, and had told his own tale with some small degree of pleasure, explaining how he had developed his own jutsu, and granting Kakashi his due for encouraging his studies, which did not slip past the grateful Jonin. What are you going to call it? Asked Naruto. What? Sasuke looked slightly bewildered at the question. He looked to Kakashi, who nodded slightly. Jutsu generally are named by their creator, both to give it a name to refer to in conversation, and to have a simple description of the skill, generally for the purpose of making it easier to train future students in it. And so you have something to shout out when you attack your foes, Naruto said, shooting Kakashi a cheeky grin. Kakashi had already opened his mouth to correct his little orange genin, but seeing the boy's smirk and the very beginning of a grin on Sasuke's own face, he swallowed his correction and smiled back. So, any ideas? Kakashi asked Sasuke. Sasuke seemed to sink into deep thought, then shrugged to himself and turned to their other teammate. What do you think, Sakura? He asked quietly. But even as he asked, his eyes darted to Kakashi, then back to her, signaling the Jonin's attention. Sakura said nothing. Indeed, she did not even react, simply trudging along the road at the same easy pace they were using by necessity, as it was the best Kakashi could do safely. Her silence, after being offered such attention and respect from her crush, sent a large number of warning bells off in Kakashi's head. Even when he stopped walking, allowing her to pass by him, she did not react. Sasuke and Naruto both shot him a look, and he quietly waved his hands down as if calming them. Whatever it was, the middle of a march was not the place to find out. The rest of that day was made in silence, with even Naruto managing to keep his mouth shut. When they set up camp that night, Kakashi gave each genin a task, and Sakura accepted tent-raising duty with a silent nod. Naruto managed to catch a rabbit by simply using enough clones to make escape impossible, and Sasuke lit a fire and cooked the rabbit fairly well for such a basic setting. Sakura said nothing during the meal, and ate with a slow, methodical motion that was quite the opposite of her normal, ravenous manner. When finished, she rose and nodded to her team, then turned to her tent, and stopped when Sasuke caught her arm. I'll take first watch, he said, not looking away from the fire. If you need to talk, I'll be outside your tent, and if not, it's as good a place to keep watch as any. Okay? He turned to look at her, and Kakashi felt a little respect, because real or not, Sasuke managed to look like he cared about her answer. Something in that look got through to her, because Sakura nodded and patted his hand for a moment before leaving. Kakashi nodded to Sasuke in acknowledgement, who nodded to Naruto, who looked confused at both of them. Kakashi raised a finger to his lips, and Naruto seemed to get that much at least. The rest of the return home was much the same, silent and calming. Sakura never became chatty during the trip, but she lost some of her grim demeanor, and on the last day she was looking ahead on the road, almost eager to return to town. Sasuke also looked driven, and had to stop himself several times when he started to outpace his teacher. Naruto seemed to vibrate with a degree of inner energy fit to blow him apart into a million little Naruto chunks, which might, when landing, possibly spell out the word ramen. Kakashi was fairly certain he saw the boy drool a little. Finally, they arrived, the great gates open and beckoning. They stopped by the gatehouse to check in, and Kakashi casually slapped a hand on Naruto's jumpsuit before the boy could run off. When Naruto stopped tugging against him, he let go, then stood up straight in front of them, as close to attention as he could get. Normally, we would debrief immediately with the Hokage on return, but there are certain provisions in the rules. Namely, we can report in any time in the next 24 hours, so long as we check in with the gate guards and we have nothing vital or time-sensitive to report. I will be checking into the hospital, and will take responsibility for the primary debriefing, although you may be retrieved or interviewed by Anbu personnel for your own debriefing at some point in the next couple days. Meanwhile, I have orders for you until I am done healing. Sakura. She stood at attention. Her eyes were dull, hollow, tired, and her body slumped slightly to one side. Kakashi knew she had slept very poorly during the trip here. I would like you to check in with Sim. Immediately. Let her know about the mission, give her any details she asks for, and otherwise do as she says. She'll likely use this in the future to consider further training, so be honest about it. All of it. Sakura nodded, and for a moment, Kakashi thought he saw a shadow of something in her eyes. He nodded to her, a dismissal, and she stepped back in acknowledgement, but remained momentarily to see where the others would be. Sasuke. Sasuke grunted. Return home and begin to replace those items expended during this trip. Other than that, rest and relax for now. I'll have some new books delivered to you, probably within a day, with a few things to study for future efforts. Sasuke shot Sakura a quick glance, then grunted and stepped back as well. Naruto. Naruto turned back to Kakashi, drool still hanging from his lips, having spent this entire time staring in the general direction of Ichiraku's. He seemed to realize he was being given an order, and straightened up a bit. Go get some ramen. Kakashi's hand darted out, quick as a snake, and snagged Naruto's jacket, holding the struggling ramen freak relatively still. While you are there, tell Tazuna he is clear to return home, and that Konohagakure will send him a rate-adjusted bill in a month or so, once the bridge is built and his country starts to make a little more money. After you eat yourself stupid, relax. He turned to the rest of them. The same goes for all of you. No training. No D ranks. Nothing. Relax. Read a book. Watch some clouds. Whatever you do for fun, do it, or find something fun to do, he said, looking at Sasuke, who scowled. Once I get checked out, we'll be doing enough D ranks while we look into some more training. This last trip gave me a few ideas. He waited for them to acknowledge him, then dismissed them, although he retained his hold on Naruto's jacket while the other two left. He leaned in, very slowly, and looked Naruto in the eye, practicing the creepy eye thing his colleague Tenzo was fond of. Naruto leaned away, then crossed his arms and glared. What? Naruto demanded, almost dangling from his sensei's hand. I know you're a clone, Naruto, he said, his voice cold and lifeless. If I catch you leaving without dismissal after a mission again, I'll have ramen banned from Konohagakure. He poked the clone hard enough to dispel it, then let out a weak chuckle and began walking slowly towards the hospital. Naruto stiffened in his chair at Ichiraku's, then shuddered when he saw Kakashi's face in his memories. Where did he get that creepy look, he thought to himself, momentarily distracted from his ramen bowl. Hey, Tazuna! He called out, suddenly very intent on following Kakashi's orders. The Inuzuka clan holdings were situated on the edge of town, close to some of the more tame training grounds. The walls were very short, unlike many clan holdings, little more than chest high for Sakura. Sim had explained once that their clan would have done away with the walls entirely were they not convenient in keeping the puppies out of trouble. One does not put walls between allies, she had told Sakura when asked about it. Walls are for foes, or mistrusted neighbors. In the pack, if you cannot walk amongst each member freely and safely, they should not be in your pack. The Inuzuka had proven to be quite popular with their neighbors, because while they were loud and boisterous, they were as loyal as, well, dogs. Sakura smiled, just a little, and hopped the wall when she got close enough. In a clan holding filled with humans and animals famed for their strong senses, border patrols and sentries would have been an insult, both to neighbors and to the others in the clan. A howl went up as soon as her feet touched the ground, and they came, claws scratching on dirt and paving stone, jowls slavering in the morning heat, charging her as fast as they could. Sakura sighed dramatically and kneeled, accepting the necessity of the challenge. She raised her arms, ready and waiting. The pack came around the corner to the nearest home, and the lead, a black and gray hound with huge teeth, was howling madly. They charged, 12 in all, and at the last moment, Sakura raised her arms to defend her face, unsure how they would act with how changed she felt. Sim found Sakura a few minutes later, still wrestling with the horde of pups, each no bigger than her arm. She held back, approaching slowly, allowing Sakura to get her giggling under control and compose herself before her pack leader. By the time she arrived within the range, she trained all of her pack to acknowledge their leader. Sakura was kneeling, perfectly calm, as was each of the pups, well, except for the one with the lopsided ears, and Sim had already determined that little one would have to be sold as a pet due to its lack of control. "Welcome back, pup," she said to Sakura with a friendly growl to her voice. "How went your mission?" She grinned hugely, excited to hear how Sakura's first real mission went, but her grin faded when Sakura's face fell and her eyes became wet. Sim grunted, giving the little future Niken the order to be at ease, and sat next to Sakura. "Tell me," she said quietly. Sakura told her story. She started off in a dull monotone, carefully reciting their trip, and as the story grew, she spent more and more time on the details, until she found herself describing the day she accepted the contract for Inari. At that point, her story faltered, and she began to recount pointless details, simply trying to hold off the ultimate point of the story. She got as far as the color of the boy's shoes before she started to break down. She cried, great, shameful tears rolling down her cheeks, unable to carry on with her story. She turned away, ashamed to be breaking down before her master, until Tsum pulled her in close and gave her a smothering hug. "Don't fight it," the older woman said, holding Sakura gently but firmly. "Let it out." It took some time, but eventually the tears stopped, and Sakura felt her pain numbed slightly from it. She sat back up, unwilling to meet Tsum's eyes, and carried on with the tale, finding that, save for the occasional sniff when she got to a more grisly part, she was able to finish her tale. Eventually, the story was done, and she waited quietly for her teacher to say something. Anything. She did not know what, but she expected some sort of backlash for her behavior. Sim merely pulled her into another hug, although this time a shorter one. "Sakura," she said, smiling. "You did good." "I killed someone," she replied flatly, feeling uncomfortable. "Yes, you did. You took a contract, followed through, and killed several people. More importantly, you killed no more than the minimum needed to complete your contract. You did so in the most direct and painless way possible, even when you killed the asshole who started this whole thing." Sim gave out a shrill whistle, and in moments, her own companion Kuramaru arrived, sitting down in front of the girls with an air of patience. His dark gray fur was ragged, with one eye and ear long gone, the missing eye covered with an eye patch. Nonetheless, his single yellow eye stared at them with an animalistic intensity, and Sakura nodded deferentially to the beast. She knew her place in the Inuzuka pack, and it was far, far below her teacher's companion. He was one of the rarest of Niken, capable of speaking directly to others, and between his intelligence and his strength he was rightly the leader of the pack. Sim smiled. "Kuramaru, Sakura here has made her first kills, an evil man who held a nation under his claws, and 2 thieves who were a danger to her and her pack. Have you anything to say on the matter?" The wolf in a dog's collar grunted. "Evil means nothing. Nations mean nothing. Thievery? Nothing, save maybe for pride in a theft done well. All of these are human words, for human creatures with human ideas and human foolishness. But the pack means everything. All who might harm the pack are foes, and woe be unto a foe who challenges your pack now that you have tasted blood. Humans kill for fun. For pleasure. For money. For pride. Dogs kill for one purpose, for their pack. Nothing beyond the pack matters, something you now know. Today, you are not a human, you are a dog, and a good dog at that." Kuramaru then stepped forward and gave Sakura a small lick on the face, leaving her coated in a bit of saliva and a lot of all. She knew some about the Inuzuka Niken, and to be considered one of their own kind was rare indeed, even more so for an outsider like herself. In hindsight, it was a silly thing, but she was at a loss for words at this gift, and so she did the only thing she could think of to indicate her acceptance, her understanding, her place as one of his own. She rolled over on her back, exposing her belly to the pack leader in submission. Sim busted out laughing, and Kuramaru grunted. You don't have to be that much of a dog, he grumbled, if cheerfully. Unfortunately, the tone of good cheer became too much for the puppies, who promptly broke ranks and swarmed the lot of them. They piled on Sum, and Kuramaru, and Sakura, who smiled and laughed and felt the weight of the human world lift from her shoulders. Sakura stayed for the rest of the day, playing with the dogs, helping with chores, and otherwise relaxing, relishing the peace within her. Eventually, the day began to fade, and she made her goodbyes to the Inuzuka, only to be stopped by Tsum, who called her into the kennel. You remember, when your training began, you asked if you might someday have a dog of your own? Sakura nodded, trying not to let the sudden hope show on her face. Unfortunately, the answer is still no, Sakura. Sakura tried just as hard not to show her disappointment, and apparently failed. Tsum laughed and patted her on the shoulder, steering her into the kennel. Don't be so down. We did vote on the matter, and you did get approval to train in our ways, including having a Niken. But something came up, and plans changed. Tsum leads Sakura to a corner of the kennel, where the cages were kept for the smallest of the dogs, the newborn pups, only just free from their milk diet. She leads Sakura past several puppies, ranging from white to gray to black, until she reached the very last cage, and stopped Sakura before it. We caught this little fellow drinking with a fresh litter. No idea how the thing got in there, but the mother didn't object, so how could we? Sakura crouched down, looking into the cage, where the little ball of fur could be seen, curled up on itself. It was mostly white, with a series of stripes running across its spine and down its sides in dark gray. Tsum patted the top of the cage, where a fairly large pile of books could be seen, along with a slightly tattered notebook. We're the best vets in Konohagakure, and we know how to care for any number of critters. We feed our dogs only the best meat, and our techniques used to maximize growth in our Niken are compatible. But well, we're dog people. She rubbed the back of her neck, grinning sharply. Some of our ways are incompatible, and I think some of your ways may not be. So, I gathered all the information I could and got it ready for you, in case you came back and I found you suitable. How about it? Want to try something we've never tried before? The ball of fur uncoiled, and gazed up at Sakura with golden eyes. Mer, the kitten said, cocking its head to one side. The next day, Sasuke set down the last of the tools on his workbench and sighed. He'd spent the first day back shopping for food, then at his apartment working on replacing his expended equipment. Midday he had been interrupted by an Anbu member, who took his disposition and then left without a word to spare. Then, in the early evening, a pile of books arrived by courier. Most of the books were fairly normal, chemistry and biology books geared towards shinobi users. But one stood out, and Sasuke grumbled when he opened it. The book was densely packed with paragraphs and charts, and the cover simply said, Genetics in Human Populations. When he opened it, he found a slip of paper from Kakashi. You are well on your way to your first goal, the paper said in Kakashi's lazy scrawl. This may be relevant to the second. I had the bookseller mark a few very relevant passages for you. It may be too soon to take action, but it's never too soon to plan ahead. Good job on the mission. Planning new training. Now put the books and tools down, and find something else to do. Sasuke grunted and put the books away. He was fairly certain the Jonin would not be watching him for such a small thing, but he was also fairly certain Kakashi would have no problem getting Naruto to do it for him. Konohagakure's orange blur was restless even at the best of times. Sasuke smirked at the thought of Naruto trying to relax for a full day. A full hour of aimless wandering found Sasuke outside the Aburame holdings. He stood around for some time, listening to the faint drone, which could be heard even outside the edge of the property, which was nothing but an expanse of green grass and closely planted but not impenetrable bushes. Eventually, he took a single step on the grass and waited. Within 10 seconds, an Aburame member leaned into view from behind one of the bushes. He nodded once at Sasuke, then turned away. Sasuke waited, not moving an inch, and within the minute Shino appeared in the same place. He too nodded to Sasuke, and Sasuke finally felt comfortable approaching. Thank you for not crushing our sentries, Shino said, his tone bland. Next time, you may walk freely. They have thick shells, and will not be harmed. They will also know your scent and notify us of your presence. Sasuke nodded and followed his friend into their clan property. The Aburame clan had a much smaller plot of land than many of the other clans in Konohagakure, only a single series of modest houses facing a single large inner courtyard, the rest of their land taken up by gardens, with many hives for various insect species scattered about. Sasuke was not familiar with the clan, but he knew they were a noble clan, and had a modest number of members. In spite of that, the houses seemed very small, and there was nobody in sight. Sasuke listened to the ever-present hum, then smiled slightly. You live underground, he said, a statement instead of a question. Shino paused for a moment, unreadable behind his glasses and coat, then nodded. He led Sasuke to one of the houses, one of the smaller ones, and opened the door to reveal a staircase leading down. Sasuke glanced at the rest of the room and nodded. The house was a fake, perfectly suitable walls and windows surrounding a simple concrete floor with a stairwell going down. Without preamble, Shino began to walk down the stairwell, and Sasuke followed quietly. The stairs curved around several times and were carved out of the surrounding stone and earth itself, although it looked like it had been preserved somehow. Instead of opening up into a tight, dark tunnel like Sasuke expected, however, it instead opened into a large and airy room, a larger copy of the square above it, filled with a few businesses and some other doors carved directly into the stone walls of the central square. A series of chandeliers with many candles lit the cavernous room, and a single column made of stone dominated the center of the square, easily 20 feet across. Sasuke could see several doorways carved into the stone pillar. "The central pillar is a stairwell that leads to our residential housing and hives," said Shino, while Sasuke watched the people in the square move about. "I cannot bring you there, they are a clan secret. But you are welcome here, as is any Konohagakure citizen. Few come. Why? Because they find our kinship with insects distasteful or disturbing." Shino walked further into the square, leading Sasuke past several shops selling ninja goods, and a restaurant that buzzed loudly as he passed. Eventually, Sasuke was led to a small, simple door with no markings save for a small jeweled scarab in place of a doorknob. Shino opened the door by stroking the scarab's back, then waved Sasuke in. The room was modestly large, lit with standard electrical lights. The walls and ceiling were unadorned earth like the rest of the place, but the floors were covered in thin padding. At the rear of the largest room, Sasuke could see two smaller rooms, one an apparent library, the other filled with workbenches and tools. "This is my family's private training area, where we work on things not related to our clan techniques or hives. Why? Because some of these things are unsafe for the insects we care for. You are welcome here at any time, with or without me. The door scarab will recognize you." Sasuke was slightly put off. In that bland wording, Shino had essentially given him access to his clan's workspace, a deep sign of trust amongst shinobi. He could not help himself. He parroted his friend's phrase back to him. "Why?" he asked quietly. Shino stepped forward and raised an arm, resting it on Sasuke's shoulder. The gesture was heartfelt but awkward, like someone who had heard of how to be companionable but never tried it, and Sasuke appreciated the effort if not the result. "I appreciate your company," Shino said in the same monotone as before. "You value silence, a trait that I find is almost singular outside of my clan. I appreciate your presence, even when we have nothing to say. My parents understand this, and wanted me to extend this gesture to ensure you know you are valued." Sasuke could think of nothing to say, and realized he needed to say nothing. Instead, he raised his own arm and rested his hand on his friend's other shoulder, no less awkward than Shino had been. They both nodded, the moment passed, and they split to wander into the rooms and determine their own projects to follow. It took Naruto 2 days before he ran out of things to do that could not be considered training. Sasuke and Sakura were off doing their own thing, so Naruto was on his own. He visited Ichiraku's. He tried to read a book, and discovered that the adventure series he had been reading before his latest mission was now painfully boring compared to his own experiences. When the Anbu member had come to take his deposition, he had been quite glad for the distraction, and the reaction the Anbu had to his stories about fighting Zabuza was mildly amusing, mostly in how hard the woman tried not to react to Naruto's pantomime as he spoke. He visited Ichiraku's. He wandered around town disguised with a henge, checking prices on things ranging from ninja tools to televisions, and was pleased to note that he might be able to upgrade his lifestyle a little between the A-rank pay he had received and his new shopping persona. For yucks, he wandered around town as himself to check prices, and while the civilian markets were still horribly priced, he was shocked to notice that the ones selling ninja goods were not only willing to sell to him for fair pricing, but were relatively good-willed in his presence. He made a note to ask Kakashi about it later. He visited Ichiraku's. On day 3, he woke up and quietly decided to break Kakashi's orders. He knew what he was doing, and knew he was breaking orders, but he suspected that Kakashi would barely mention it, and he could not sit idle any longer. He sought out his team, but Sakura's parents told him she was busy with the Inuzuka clan on a project, and Sasuke was nowhere to be found. He even tried to find Kurenai and her team in the hopes of some sparring, but in the end even they could not be found. Ultimately defeated, he turned away and did the only thing he could. He visited Ichiraku's. This time, though, he had a pleasant surprise. "Kakashi-sensei," he said cheerfully on seeing his team leader. Kakashi turned on his stool and smiled at Naruto. His side still looked a little stiff, and he was obviously tired, but it was still good to see him outside the hospital. Naruto, I knew you would show up shortly. Come, have a bowl on me while we talk about training. Naruto fairly floated to his stool. Free ramen? Training? It was like he was in heaven. But... Kakashi-sensei, you still look hurt. Are you sure you can train us right now? No. Naruto's forehead banged on the counter, and he sighed. Kakashi smiled to himself, then grunted and pulled himself up from his stool. I won't be able to work with you for some time, first, to heal, and second, because I can't train you in what you need right now. Naruto looked up at his team leader, perplexed. I am a ninjutsu master, Naruto. I focus on low endurance, high power efforts. Quite frankly, I am a low chakra person who just happens to be very good at control. You, meanwhile, are a high endurance brawler who can spray chakra like a fire hydrant and not have to worry about it, comparatively. I am not an optimal teacher for you. He smirked at Naruto's frown. Thanks to our previous success with Kurenai, however, I was able to foist off some of my responsibility on another, in exchange for teaching my own specialty. I will be training Sasuke and another student over the next month. Sakura will be training with the Inuzuka during that time on a project she got my approval on. And you? You're going to hell. He stepped aside, pulling back the cloth covering the small, enclosed eating area even as the battle cry feared all across Konohagakure pierced the air. Dynamic entry! Chapter 15, Yurouzi. Kakashi had to admit, he was impressed with Mato Gai's entrance. The green-clad shinobi entered the ramen stand at a reasonable percentage of his normal speed with a full extension flying kick, bowl-cut hair blowing in the wind of his passing, teeth sparkling in the sun shafts coming through the privacy curtains. Unfortunately, Guy was not well known for planning ahead, and the backstop to his kick was not a structurally sound wall of concrete, but a lightly built counter and the heavy but unsecured stove behind it. Guy had politely pulled himself out of the wreckage, and had politely paid twice what the counter and stove was worth, and had politely paid some more when Kakashi pointed out they would be out of work for a few days while they got the new equipment installed. When they finally exited the stand almost a half hour later, Naruto was still glaring at Guy. Ah! Shouted Guy, striking his manly pose number 3 with thumb extended. A terrible way to meet you, Uzumaki Naruto, but still, what youthful challenges we shall face together. Naruto's anger did not fade, and his glare only became sharper. Come now! Guy shouted, sweeping Naruto off his feet and holding the boy up at arm's length. Don't you want to learn new and powerful techniques from your own sensei's incredible rival? Naruto continued to glare, his arms now crossed before him while his legs dangled limply. You killed my favorite ramen stand, he grumbled, his voice deep. For a moment, Guy thought he felt the slightest touch of killing intent from the little genin in his arms. Kakashi coughed politely from the side, and Guy sighed and set Naruto on the ground. He then reached into his flak jacket and pulled out a 1 ryo coin, looked at it ruefully, then flipped it to Kakashi. Guy, Kakashi said, after catching the coin without even glancing at it. Do you mind if I tell Naruto about the coin? It might help a lot. Guy nodded, his teeth gleaming with the power of his youthful smile. Kakashi walked over to Naruto and held out the coin. It was a small, old coin, and the etching on it was barely visible, having been worn down by being passed from hand to hand countless times. Even the edges were beveled, making the coin look more like a tiny metal disc than a piece of currency. Mato Guy and I have known each other a long time. In that time, we have made many bets with each other, always for bragging rights and this single coin, which is all Guy could spare when we started this tradition. This coin was newly minted when we got it, and as you can see, it has passed between us many, many times. This coin is the key to Guy's power, and I think it'll also be the key to yours, the key to a trait you both share in spades. I made a bet with Guy the other day, for this coin. Kakashi looked at Guy. What was the bet? You bet that I could not make Naruto smile after meeting him without resorting to tickling or jokes. Kakashi nodded cheerfully. And do you see the trap I laid for you? Guy nodded in return, his face a picture of careful consideration. You knew I would try to impress, and would probably enter with one of my youthful dynamic entries. You picked the location we would meet, knowing it would be structurally weak. And you then sensed where I was on my approach and opened the curtain, giving me an obvious entrance point, which happened to be directly in front of the counter and stove, to ensure I damaged enough of the place to shut it down. You set it up so that I could never make Naruto smile, regardless of my efforts, because I had already been so cruel to him. Kakashi nodded, and turned to Naruto, who was flabbergasted at the green-clad man who wrecked his favorite eating place on a bet. You have now met the 4th most intelligent man in Konohagakure, Mato Guy, the sublime green beast of Konoha. When we met, Guy did nothing but challenge me to physical contests. Weightlifting, running laps, sparring matches. And when I won, what do you think I challenged him to do? Naruto looked at Guy, standing like a statue of muscle, flesh made to stone through work. He could only think of one kind of person who could look like that, a person like Kiba, someone who was all force and little thought. Yet Mato Guy did not seem to be a meathead at all. The answer became obvious. You made him read a book, didn't you? Guy laughed and gave Naruto a thumbs up. Books, shogi matches, logic puzzles. Whenever Kakashi reached my level in body, he forced me to reach his level in mind, and together we rose higher, powered by our youthful competition. Kakashi just shook his head, then raised his hand. It's my turn to bet, I believe. Guy nodded eagerly. Kakashi held out the coin, then closed his fist around it. I bet you cannot scare me with anything you teach Naruto over the next month. He placed the coin calmly in his pocket, then raised his fingers to plug both of his ears, causing Naruto to frown in confusion. Challenge accepted, shouted Guy, taking his manly pose #1 with arms up and ready to go, his shout echoing off the surrounding buildings and causing Naruto to slap his hands over his ears. At the end of this month, you shall face a foe you shall fear, and it shall be Naruto. Come, Uzumaki, let us begin. Guy grabbed Naruto's arm before the boy could object and started to run. We start by going shopping. I forgot to say no green track suit, Kakashi thought with a sigh. Kakashi did not tell you what we would be doing, did he, Naruto? Naruto shook his head and picked at his cloths. Guy had insisted that they buy Naruto a green jumpsuit, identical to his own, before they retired to a distant and quiet training ground. A series of wooden posts were scattered about the grounds, apparently at random, and the whole location was surrounded by trees. Kakashi has given me a report on your skills, but I would like to see for myself. He reached into his vest and pulled out a kunai, tossing it lightly to Naruto. Please create 10 clones, and throw that blade, and only that blade, at a single target. Naruto shrugged at the command. He chose a target, one of the posts far from his new teacher, then created 10 clones. He counted to 3, out loud, and they all threw at once. 11 blades thudded into the post at various heights. Guy walked over to the post, chin in hand, and looked closely at it. He then took one of the kunai out of the post and studied it. I predict this is the original. Dispel the clones, please. He looked closely at the blade in his hands, and when it vanished with the clone who had created it, he looked delighted. All of your tools work this way, Naruto? They all continue to work, just as the original, until you dispel? Naruto nodded again. Excellent. Guy reached into his vest again and pulled out a small scroll. Kakashi mentioned you had shown more than a little interest in learning how to use a sword in the past. Is that correct, Naruto? Naruto's eyes fairly sparkled as he nodded, his face breaking into a huge grin. Guy smiled back, his teeth as sparkly as Naruto's eyes. Then I have a gift for you, he said, unrolling the scroll to reveal a storage seal. He laid it out the ground, as Naruto began to hop in place, leaning over to see what awesome weapon he would get. Guy pressed his hand to the seal and released it, to reveal a stick. Naruto froze, then slowly toppled forward to land face down in the dirt. I should have known, he mumbled before pulling himself back up. Guy picked up the stick, nearly a meter long, smooth and straight as a staff. One end was wrapped in cord, a basic handle size for 2 hands, and on the other was etched a single word. Grit. He held the stick out by the uncorded end towards Naruto. Tomorrow, you shall begin training, with the aid of my own protege, Rock Lee. Today, you shall instead train with me. You have one goal. Strike me with your stick, using no clones. Begin when ready. Naruto grabbed the handle of the stick, and Guy let go. The stick immediately fell to the ground with a thud, burying itself almost 1/8 of an inch into the dirt. Shit, said Naruto, grabbing the handle with both hands. He managed to get the stick up with both hands and set it on his shoulder, staggering slightly under the weight. How do I fight with this? And what is this? It weighs way too much to be wooden. Guy laughed. That is a training sword. I made it long ago, when I started learning to use swords myself. By putting chakra into the wood through the mark on the end, you can increase its weight. I would not have increased it so far for you, but Kakashi tells me you have unusual stamina, so we need to push you hard to test your limits. Guy crouched slightly. Now hit me. When you can hit me, just once, we will move on to your next step in training. Guy looked at Naruto, who was sitting on the grass, relaxing and cooling down. His face was cheerful, but not nearly as cheerful as he wanted it to be. No amount of smiles could possibly indicate how he felt. Guy was not a fool, doubly so when it came to training. He had expected Naruto to spend about 10 minutes at most trying to swing the training sword at him before he would start reducing the chakra in it. He planned on giving an explanation on why he used such weights, gaining speed and muscle in exchange for pain. He'd even had some of his shinobi strength tiger bomb ready for the inevitable pain. But Guy witnessed the impossible, the inconceivable. Naruto just kept going. Naruto would charge and swing his stick haphazardly as fast as he could. After a few minutes, his arms would start to droop. When that happened, he would stop and think about what to try next for no more than a minute, and in that time, his strength would mostly have returned. Guy could see that he was diminished ever so slightly at each pause, but at his current rate, Naruto might well have to stop for food before he had to stop for lack of strength. Guy rejoiced on the inside, even as he told Naruto to take a half-hour rest, even as he ran all the way down to the corner store across town that carried his favorite protein-enhanced, vitamin-loaded extra spicy curry carries, and when he ran back with extra container in hand for his new student, he wept small, manly tears to find Naruto swinging his practice sword, again and again. Just for the sake of something to do while he waited. He had finally found Leah's sparring partner. Oh, how he cried out in joy for this youthful treasure. This wondrous young man with the flames of youth and his heart, and a desire to work. And once Naruto stopped finding his comments disturbing, he really started to take a shine to Guy's philosophy of youth. Remember, Naruto, only through hard work can we become strong. Yes, Guy-sensei. In his room, Neji's eye twitched, and he looked out the window, as if looking for storm clouds on the horizon. Remember, Naruto, only through the fires of youth can you find the strength to make one last repetition. Yes, Guy-sensei. At Training Ground 3, Tenten paused in the middle of trying a jutsu and looked around warily, as if she was being hunted. And always remember, Naruto, that green jumpsuits make the best sort of clothing, both simple to care for and fashionable. Yes, Guy-sensei. Relaxing by a tree, watching Sasuke and Tenten, Kakashi reached out to take a sip from his canteen, then suddenly found himself making a fist, crushing the heavy metal container in his hand, and wondered why. Guy and Naruto sat in the grass. Guy tossed Naruto one of the curry carries, and opened his own. Remember, Naruto, carefully balanced, nutritionally complete food is all you need to fuel your strength, but spice is life. Yes, Guy-sensei. Naruto opened his own container and took a huge bite. In his room, Neji relaxed. In the forest, Tenten shrugged and returned to her practice. Kakashi unclenched his hand. And Naruto immediately refused to ever emulate Guy again, while he emptied his stomach into the bushes, over the sound of Guy cheering him on for such a youthful expulsion. The next day, Naruto arrived at the training ground, practice sword on his back, to find two guys waiting for him. One was the right age, as he had expected, but the other was much younger, only a couple years his senior. Same jumpsuits, same leg warmers, even the same haircut and eye color. Naruto jumped to a logical yet incorrect conclusion. I didn't know Lee was your son! Guy and Lee laughed, although Lee a little less so. Lee is not my son, Naruto. After Kakashi forced me to take the DNA test, we are certain. Guy-sensei! Lee! Guy-sensei! Lee! Naruto stared at the two of them, shouting and holding each other. He was young, but not so young to not understand certain facts of life. The shouting? Not so bad. The identical appearance? A little iffy. The inexplicable view of the sun setting on the horizon in the background as they do it? It's official. They must be a couple. Naruto inched just slightly away as the display continued. Guy coughed slightly as the two of them wrapped it up. Sorry, Naruto. I know how the young think, and to make things clear, no, we are not a couple. Yes, it's okay you find it slightly disturbing, and no, we won't stop doing it. Lee nodded. It looks weird because all true companions look weird when truly comfortable with themselves. When we hug, there is no discomfort of two men who are not attracted to one another worrying about the other's attraction. It is a manly hug of friendly understanding. Join us and discover how it feels. Lee reached out at Naruto, his teeth already beginning to sparkle, when Guy smacked him on the head. No! Remember, Lee, manly and unashamed hugs are only for those who want them freely. To force our ways onto others would break the very companionship we seek. Of course. Lee pulled out a notebook and began to write as Guy approached Naruto. He checked the weight on the training sword, pouring some more chakra into it as he did so, then nodded to himself. Like yesterday, your goal is simple, Naruto. Strike Lee with your sword, just once, without clones. Unlike yesterday, Lee will be allowed to defend with blocks and his own strikes. When you can hit Lee regularly, we will begin your proper training in the art of the sword. He turned to Lee, who was putting away his notebook. Ready, Lee? Yes, Guy-sensei. Guy stepped back, smiling as Naruto raised his weapon. Begin! It took Naruto 3 days to hit Lee the first time. The entire first day, Lee had simply fled, and Naruto had chased him. Whenever Naruto would tire, Lee would dart in and strike at him. Naruto tried to swing the training weapon when Lee did so, and failed completely to hit his target, his arms straining to swing the now much heavier stick. "Guy-sensei," shouted Lee after a full hour passed. "Should you not lower the weight a little?" Guy shook his head and watched. By the end of the first day, Naruto was filthy with sweat and tired. And just out of his reach, panting, hand on knees, Lee waited for Naruto to move. Every time Naruto took a shaky step forward, Lee took one back. "I do not understand how we can progress, if he cannot possibly recover, Guy-sensei." Guy shook his head, and called the training done for the day. By the end of day 2, Lee was staggering away, while Naruto was only slightly shaken by his exhaustion. At the end of day 3, Naruto dragged himself off the ground after a 10-minute breather, walked over, and tapped Lee on the shoulder with the sword. Lee slipped backward to lay, trembling, on the grass, and Naruto joined him. "Excellent," said Guy, smiling. He stood over the two boys, arms crossed, teeth gleaming. "Now, Naruto, I have one question to ask you, before we begin proper training." He sat down next to the two boys, who managed to drag themselves to a sitting position. Naruto looked tired, but enthused. Kakashi was right, thought Guy, watching as Naruto's breathing slowed quickly. His ability to recuperate quickly from injury makes his very effective when it comes to physical training. Muscles damage themselves in use, and most people had to rest for some time to allow them to heal after reaching the point of exhaustion. Naruto healed in minutes from such small injuries, allowing him to train constantly so long as he avoided major injury. Guy reached into his vest and pulled out a coin similar to the one he and Kakashi had traded for so many years. He held it out, gripped carefully on the edge between thumb and index finger, and looked at it as it shined in the sun. "Why is the coin important, Naruto?" "Lee already knows this lesson," he said with a smile at his miniature genin clone, who was staring at the coin intently. "Why do we bother with this coin? 1 ryo is hardly worth any challenge, I should think." Naruto looked at the coin while he thought. "It's not the money," he said to himself. He imagined the real coin, well worn and well used in its purpose for years. He thought about how often they must have exchanged it, over and over, each one competing hard to send it back to the other. Naruto could not fathom how a 1 ryo coin was worth being motivated about. It hit him then, and he smiled. "The coin is not worth it," he said, forgetting his exhaustion long enough to jump to his feet, pointing at the green-clad Jonin. "The coin is pointless. It's just like betting your next breath of air, or a sock, or a stick." Guy laughed and nodded. "Exactly, Naruto. The coin is just a convenient token to represent our bet. So why do we bother making a bet at all?" Naruto looked confused, and sat back down. He was quiet for some time, his face drooping slowly as he struggled with the question. Eventually, after he had fully recovered his breath, Lee raised his hand. "Guy-sensei, I think I should help Naruto-san in this, because he will never get it himself. This is not because he is unintelligent, but because he already knows instinctively. It would be like seeing the forest for the trees." Guy nodded in agreement, and Lee turned to Naruto, who looked unhappy at his comment. "The bet gives Guy-sensei and Kakashi-san motivation, Naruto-san. They do not care about the coin, except as a token of exchange for motivating each other. They challenge each other so that they can rise above the challenge. You, who are already motivated, would never guess that others might need motivation for themselves." Naruto nodded, understanding. Guy was not nearly as calm. He lunged off of the ground, arms raised, thumbs out, teeth sparkling. "Exactly, my glorious student! Because with the proper motivation, the fires of our youth are boundless." Naruto sighed, and waited for it. "Guy-sensei!" "Lee!" Learning proper sword technique takes years, even with the aid of shadow clone training. But the terms for the bet with Kakashi said nothing about form or style. It took only a few additional days for Guy to test Naruto's capabilities, procure a set of practice blades, and train enough of the very basics to prepare Naruto for future training. During that time, he worked with Naruto personally to minimize risk of injury to Lee, who watched with mild interest between his own exercises. At all times, day and night, Naruto had his clones reading books on sword care, books on stances and techniques, books on legendary swordsmen and women, books on how to defeat sword users. Each day, Guy had him try a new stance, a new style, until he ended that effort with a grin and explained that he had found the right style for Naruto. "You are no expert," said Guy, on the last day of full, day-long training they would have. Guy was already dedicated to continuing to train Naruto in weapons technique, but he had his own team to teach, so they would be reduced to 1 day per week. You never will be there, Naruto. True swordsmen must dedicate their lives to the sword, and that tends to lead to shinobi with a very narrow focus. Remember the fight you had with Zabuza? Naruto nodded. When his arm was damaged, he continued to use his sword. When his remaining arm grew tired, he stopped fighting rather than drawing a kunai or dominating Kakashi with his bare hands. Can you imagine how lucky Zabuza was, that he managed to trick Kakashi before losing that arm? Can you imagine Kakashi making the same mistake? Naruto found himself agreeing after he considered it. Kakashi had been gravely wounded at the time, so much so that Naruto had expected him to die. A shinobi of Zabuza's strength could have simply overpowered his crippled foe, but only if he thought about it first. Naruto resolved himself, then and there, to never grow so attached to his weapon that he could not pick up another. He looked up into Guy's face, and saw him nod gently, as if he could see that very resolution written on his face. Guy reached into his jacket and pulled out a scroll. Kakashi-sen authorized me to make a purchase on your behalf, using some of the remaining funds from your mission to the wave. Naruto sighed at that, but only a little. He had planned on getting a few things with that payoff, but Kakashi had insisted he spend only a tiny portion of the pay he received, and now he knew why. Maybe I can replace the broken television still, he thought as he reflexively caught the scroll Guy tossed at him. His confusion only increased when he unsealed the scrolls, revealing 2 very plain-looking swords, crossed over a small book. The swords were 2.5 feet long, hilt to tip, the blades apparently straight and thick to judge by the shape of them. Each was sheathed in cheap wood, with a matching handle poorly wrapped in cheap leather, and without any sort of crossguard. Several small metal studs could be seen through the leather, poking out of it to form a slightly molded grip. He opened his mouth to complain, then looked at Guy, who was watching him carefully with a small smirk on his face. Naruto became suspicious and pulled one of the swords partially out of its sheath, then stopped and stared. The blade was made of steel, and Naruto knew enough from his studies to know it looked like good steel, but the single edge was bright and silvery, shining in the sunlight. He raised the sword slightly and looked closely at the edge. The silvery metal was not steel, and had been carefully folded to cover only the edge. Naruto pulled the blade out in full and saw that the silvery material ran along the entire blade. A quick check of the other sword showed the same silvery edge, although he did not draw the second fully. The case and wrapping is terrible on purpose, to hide the quality and value of the sword, said Naruto. That has to be Kakashi-sensei's idea. But what's with the weird edge? The edge is made of a special metal, taken from the rarest of finds, a fallen meteorite. When treated properly, the metal can be infused with the user's chakra to great effect. Do not try to do this just now, we'll handle that training later. Naruto nodded and continued to stare at the sword in his hand while Guy held his tongue on the rest of the information. The metal for the blade's edge had come from the Hokage himself, and only when both Kakashi and Guy had petitioned for permission to seek some out, for the star iron was a very precious and limited resource. With his chakra reserves and shadow clones, Kakashi had said at the meeting, such a weapon could well make him one of the most dangerous front-line fighters in the world when he becomes fully trained. Coming from a man as infamous as Hatake Kakashi, that was quite the compliment, and the Hokage spotted it. The Hokage had agreed, and even donated the metal from his own family's vault, but insisted that Guy and Kakashi claimed it as a gift from themselves. Guy agreed completely with him. The village may not react favorably to find that the Hokage gave such a gift to the village pariah, even if it was from his own pocket. Only the edge is made of this material, for it is a rare thing indeed. The book details how to maintain the edge, using a chakra technique instead of the normal methods, because to lose any of this metal to a sharpening stone would be a terrible waste. Until you master that technique, you will not use these swords. Sealed further in the scroll is an identical pair, sharp, but without the lining. Naruto's face fell. He lightly cut his thumb with the blade, having been taught that a sword should not be drawn without being used least it turns on the owner. It was a silly myth, and yet Guy taught that myth deliberately to encourage the idea that drawing a weapon means bloodshed, one way or another. Naruto wiped the tiny drop of blood off of the sword carefully, sheathed it, and laid it back on the scroll. I cannot afford this, Guy-sensei, and I won't take money from you or Kakashi. He was looking down at the swords as he said this, and Guy could see the pain in his eyes at giving up such a gift. You two already support and train me. I can't take anything else from you. Guy stepped forward and laid his hands on the blonde's shoulders. Naruto, he said, without his customary smile. This is a gift, indirectly, from the village. Kakashi and I went to those we knew had the metal, and asked for the smallest bit of it. Those who gave willingly, sometimes enthusiastically. With these weapons, your chance at survival, at success, becomes that much more likely, and those who gave know this. You paid only for the work needed to craft a normal blade and then add the metal, which was costly, but within your budget. There is no sensible reason to refuse this gift. That's technically correct, thought Guy, as Naruto's eyes grew watery and his face began to beam in a huge smile. The best kind of correct. Then Lee grabbed Naruto with a loud whoop, tossing him in the air and shouting about the youthful challenges ahead, begging for spars, and otherwise being the bright star of fiery youth that they both knew, and Guy started to laugh. Naruto stood ready, and at Guy's direction, went into the training kata he had learned the previous week, a series of practice slashes designed to work as a whole, like a dance. Guy called out another, and he swapped into it, not without flaws, but each stroke was true and fairly accurate. Guy nodded, and called for a rest at the end of the latest set. You improve slowly even with your clones, Naruto, but you improve. And more importantly, you seem to have a much better grasp on how a sword works. Now I will teach you how to fight. Naruto stomped his food down. I thought you were doing that all this time, he shouted. Guy chuckled, and shook his head. Grab your practice blades, he said. Once done, Guy nodded to Lee, who knew of this plan and had prepared. Make 4 clones, and attack Lee using what you know so far. You may not have more than 4 clones at a time, but you may replace them when lost. Naruto made his clones, and as one, they charged, as one group. One stopped in front of Lee and began his first move, only for Lee to leap directly over that clone and attack the clone furthest away from his initial starting point. That clone flinched, instinctively bringing one blade down at Lee, only for Lee to step to one side and kick the clone under the arm, dispelling it. The remaining 3 clones turned, the nearest one launching into a different kata, both blades windmilling in a careful sequence of vertical cuts, but the whistling steel did nothing to stop Lee, who ducked into one side and landed a single punch. The next half hour was more of the same. Naruto would make clones would launch attacks, and Lee would crush them. Eventually, one of the clones dashed in, arms raised in one of the many tried and failed katas, and when Lee started to move, that clone dropped all pretense of careful, choreographed attacks and simply made the best attack it could. The blunt blade tapped Lee lightly on a bicep, the barest of touch, and Guy called the spar. How did Lee keep away from you so long? Naruto frowned. He acted like he knew what I was doing. I did, said Lee, his breathing evening out even as he spoke. Katas are an important part of being a full swordsman, but they are intended to make those moves reflexive so they require no thought, allowing you time to think of how you will defeat the foe. This works excellently in organized sword fights, but against a real foe, it can be dangerous. Guy nodded. Naruto, unless you specialize, those katas will never be effective enough to justify their use for you, because you already have a way to get time to think. You make more clones. He grinned, and Naruto grinned back. Your clones can think for themselves, allowing them to think on the fight at hand, and for you to think on the battle as a whole. Naruto sat in the grass with a grumpy grunt. Why did you have me learn all them then? He demanded. Lee sat down next to Naruto and offered the boy a canteen. It's like any other training, to teach you what you can do. You know how much the swords weigh, how easy or hard it is to move them from any point to any point, and how hard you can hit, all because of those katas. Besides, said Guy, Kakashi mentioned that you were a natural brawler, good at improvisation. Trying to force you to be orderly would be foolish of us both. There is something far more effective you can be trained to do. Chapter 16, Cats Are Not Dogs. Sakura spotted the problem almost immediately. Kiri, her new feline companion, did not like her. At all. It was the small hints that tipped her off. The cat poop in her bed. The suspicious smell of ammonia in her shoes. The shredded wardrobe. The complete unwillingness to follow any order whatsoever. Kiri would deliberately and even gleefully disobey Sakura in the most spectacular manner it could, no matter how politely Sakura gave the order. It would wait for her to eat, then jump on her plate. When she shooed it away, it would turn to go, then stop, look her in the eye, and tip over her water glass. At one point, it clawed at her leg as she walked by its cage, casually shredding the edge of the one dress she had that was not wet and smelling, again, suspiciously of ammonia, an old one from the back of the closet that was far too tight in the shoulders to be comfortable. Ultimately, she had to leave the cat in its cage when not working with it to keep it out of trouble. Sim had provided her with the cage, a fairly large one with plenty of space, and had given her a manual on crate training. Apparently, Sakura thought to herself on a regular basis, dogs would willingly stay in their cage, instead of fighting tooth and nail to stay out of it. Sim had given Sakura a book titled Behavioral Reinforcement in Dogs. Sakura had read it diligently, reading about the differences between positive and negative reinforcement, as well as positive and negative punishment. She then tried to apply it to Kiri's training, which proved to be a fruitless endeavor. At first, Sakura tried to please the cat, using positive reinforcement in the form of cat treats to get her to follow orders. Kiri did not react in the least to the treats, but the next morning the bag was found empty on the floor next to a very satisfied Kiri. Sakura tried positive punishment next with a little spray bottle, squirting the cat whenever it tried to mess with Sakura's food. That lasted less than 10 minutes before Kiri mauled the bottle, and Sakura's hand, whenever she reached for it. Sakura then tried placing the cat in her cage whenever it acted up. This sad attempt at negative punishment failed just as poorly as the other training efforts, because Kiri would sit in her cage and yowl so dreadfully that not a single person in the house could sleep. Sakura tried to tough it out, and her parents were supportive until the neighbors stopped by at 2 in the morning and started yowling back. Sakura was giving serious consideration in using negative reinforcement next, the application of a negative effect until the subject did the right thing to end it. Unfortunately, some happened to catch Sakura trying to buy the shock collar. She had flat out told the girl that there was nothing short of animal cruelty that could work in that manner, and the look in her eye as she said it clearly indicated that Sakura was not going to be doing that. Some was at a loss, although many years later she wanted to kick herself for not realizing the problem sooner. She had spent most of her life with dogs, training dogs, learning the ways of dogs, and in the end, her previous experience got in the way. She suggested many things, from treats to punishments, cheerful friendly mannerisms to snarly and commanding voices, and all were met with stony glares or mauling by the cat under Sakura's care. After a week, Sakura was ready to be done. She had spent the entire time trying to get the cat to simply react to her commands with anything but violence and disdain. She had given orders in every tone from sweet and light to shouted demands, and nothing worked. Finally tired of her efforts after her latest attempt, she sighed and sat down next to her disobedient cat. "I suppose you're proud of yourself," she said. Kiri blinked once, but did not look away. Sakura sighed again and picked up the cat, even as it scratched at her, and set it in her lap, gently stroking it with one hand while keeping it in place with another. "Well, I suppose you'll just have to be a pretty little pet instead of a battle companion," she said as she scratched Kiri behind the ears. The cat purred slightly, causing Sakura to stop. She never heard her cat do that, no matter how she tried to flatter or pet it. After a moment, Kiri nudged her hand, and she started petting again. Sakura sighed, but she smiled all the same at her difficult little cat. "I wish I knew what I was doing wrong," she murmured as the cat started to purr again. Kiri stopped purring, and Sakura looked down to see it staring at her, waiting patiently. Of course, Sakura thought with an internal sigh. Of course it's intelligent enough to understand my language. She slid the cat off her lap and knelt down to look it in the eye, then asked, "What am I doing wrong? Can you show me?" Kiri blinked, then trotted away. Sakura waited a moment, then sighed when she heard the food bowl turn over again. The cat was always turning the food bowl over, scattering the carefully balanced and nutritious food some had prepared for it to maximize its growth. Sakura walked into the other room to clean up the mess before her parents commented on it, then stopped to stare at her cat. Kiri was sitting on the bowl, staring right back at her, and in that moment, Sakura was both enthused and deeply embarrassed. "You don't like the food?" she said, not a question, a statement, and she heard Kiri's purr from across the room. "All right. Let's find some food." In the end, Sakura could only think of one way to find what Kiri might like. She brought the cat to a nearby grocery store, carrying it tightly to keep it from running off. The owner of the nearest shop that might be useful was a middle-aged man with a large bald spot and a cheery grin named Dan. She had visited the store a couple times in the past, and knew the man was a bit of a bookworm, and friendly enough, but beyond that, he was just another person hovering at the edge of her life. His shop was well stocked in meats, however, and she knew from her studies with some that cats were obligate carnivores, requiring meat to survive, so it seemed like a good place to start. He was very tolerant when Sakura started requesting a small sample of every sort of meat she could find, and became enthusiastic when she paid him a more than reasonable fee for the samples. Kiri, for her part, was so well behaved that Sakura had trouble remembering this same cat had ruined her cloths, bed, and house. It had hopped lightly onto a small table and patiently watched the grocer as he worked with an air of serious effort Sakura had never seen before. It even purred at him when he brought each set of samples out. It took a little while for Sakura to figure out what Kiri liked, but a short list eventually was written down on a slip of paper just as the shopkeeper was getting ready to close for the day. "So, what do you want today?" Sakura asked Kiri, half expecting a dull stare. Instead, Kiri walked over to the case and reached up to tap the glass over the chicken and meowed. The grocer chuckled when he saw that, and started wrapping some up before Sakura could say anything. After he handed over the meat, he reached down to scratch the cat behind the ears. "That's a smart cat you have there, miss," he said as it purred at him. I wonder if she'd like to pick her own food out in the future. Sakura said nothing, gazing thoughtfully at her cat. After preparing for bed, Sakura picked up Kiri, but this time, she watched closely. Kiri's ears immediately went back, a sure sign of displeasure, and it turned slightly to face her cage. Sakura nodded to herself, and brought the cat over to her bed instead. She set it down next to her, and they looked at each other. I'm sorry, she said, reaching out to pat it on the head. The cat purred, then rubbed against her hand. I don't suppose you'd be willing to use your litter box instead of my shoes and bed if I don't try to cram you in the cage? Kiri meowed, and Sakura swore to herself it sounded like a yes. She shrugged and shuffled under her blankets. After a few moments, she felt a light weight on her hips as Kiri climbed onto her and settled down. She stuck a hand out of the covers and scratched the cat behind the ears, and kept scratching as her cat purred and purred. The next morning, Sakura woke up to find her hand still resting on Kiri's neck. She sat up and looked at the little kitten in her lap, its white fur gleaming in the sun. She gave it a little scratch, and got a loud, pleasant purr from it as it came awake. Sakura ate her breakfast in peace, with Kiri sitting on the table beside her, waiting patiently. When she finished, she walked to the door and opened it, then turned back to her cat. Would you like to walk to the store with me instead of being carried? She asked politely. Kiri stared at her for several seconds before walking out the door. When they walked into the grocery store, Kiri immediately ran to the owner and meowed. He chuckled and gave her a pat. What do you want today, little pretty kitty? He asked cheerfully, and he seemed unsurprised when Kiri ran over to the meat display and tapped on the glass over the beef. Sakura watched it happen and nodded to herself. She walked over and crouched down next to Kiri, who looked up at her. Do you want to pick your own food all the time? Sakura asked. Kiri meowed and purred at her, rubbing against her legs. Sakura left a sizable chunk of money with the grocer, who was deeply amused by the arrangement, and yet not particularly surprised. Sakura asked him why he was treating this as normal and got a laugh out of him. I've always been a cat person, Miss Haruno, Dan said, even as Kiri rubbed against his legs and meowed for attention. I understand what they are, and what they are not. They are not pack creatures, and you are not their boss. They are loyal and respectful, but they demand such loyalty and respect in kind, and they are very independent. I am assuming you're trying to make a Nico out of it? Sakura nodded. Did you ask her first? Sakura shook her head, and blushed just a little. She noticed Kiri sitting at his feet, staring at her, and she swore the little fuzzball had a smirk on its face. That gimlet stare continued until the grocer distracted it with a pat. I know a little about those folks who keep dogs as companions elsewhere in town. I am guessing they are big on commands and hierarchy, which is great for them. Dogs run in packs. Cats run alone. Maybe you should get to know what it is to be a cat before you try to train one. Sakura nodded, mostly to herself. The rest of the week, Sakura spent most of her time with Dan when she was not training with Tsum or Kiba on her taijutsu. He was no ninja, and not particularly strong or smart, or wise according to himself, but he knew cats, and knew how to teach Sakura about them. So she and Kiri hovered around the shop, talking to Dan between customers, which were few and far between. Sakura had noticed a lack of visitors, and had commented. Dan had laughed at that from where he was at the time, sweeping the floor near the door. I have few needs, he said cheerfully, and no family to care for. My few customers are sufficient to pay my bills and keep my store stocked, and I don't mind hanging about the shop, so I need no hired help. One could say that I live here, and just happen to let people walk into my house and give me money for stuff out of my refrigerator. Dan told her stories about cats he owned, cats he'd cared for, cats he'd heard about, and cats of legends from several cultures. He taught her to never trust a feral cat, which, having lost its trust in humanity, would lash out even against people who meant well. He taught her to beware when training, because cats were often cruel to their prey. Sakura had opened her mouth to assure him Kiri would never do that, then shut it when she remembered how the cute little kitten had treated the stuffed mouse toy she favored. Sakura learned that cats were cunning animals under normal circumstances, never mind the smarter ones like Kiri that might be suitable for training. A cat would see a mouse run into a hole, and wait patiently for however long it took for their prey to forget their presence and place themselves within range for a strike. They were patient, stealthy, and quiet. She also learned that cats vocalized very little except for when they interacted with humans, who generally failed to realize that body language was the language of felines. When two cats stared at each other, the slightest of movements could mean any number of things. She learned the basics of tail twitches and ear positions, and over time she came to realize that Kiri had been trying to communicate with her as a cat since day one. That's probably good for your goals, said Dan when she brought it up. Means she thinks of you more as a cat than as a human, That you're capable of understanding it or at least of making the effort. That's a sign of respect from you, and one given in return from her. She's waiting for you to ask, you know. Sakura shook her head and focused on Dan. She had zoned out slightly, sitting in the sun on a bench outside of the shop. Dan had told her to do so for at least an hour each day, just sit in the sun with her cat. Sakura had not understood the purpose at first, but after a little while, she realized that it was pure companionship. She sat next to her cat, who sat next to her, and that in itself was all that was needed to be considered good company. She found herself enjoying those moments, where the world was still and unfocused and utterly peaceful. It was peaceful in a way she never really felt or appreciated before. Sakura had taken to calling it her lazy cat jutsu, and Dan had laughed and formally asked to adopt her technique for himself. Who? She asked, snapping out of her lazy stupor. Dan nodded to Kiri, who was laying on her side and watching them. She's waiting for you to ask her to train as a shinobi's companion. Sakura scratched Kiri behind the ears and smiled. And I'm waiting for her to tell me how she feels. She already knows how I feel about it. Why bother her until she decides? Kiri sat up and stared at Sakura, her golden eyes intense. Sakura stared back, a lazy smile on her face, until Kiri stretched up and tapped Sakura's forehead protector. Sakura nodded and gave her another scratch, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the sound of her companion purring. Okay, she said, leaning back and shutting her eyes. Tomorrow. Chapter 17, Cold Eyes and Cold Hearts. Kakashi sighed and looked at his 3 temporary students talking at the training grounds they had been assigned. Kakashi had set up his usual hiding spot to observe how they interacted when he was late. They got along exactly as he had thought they would. It was a disaster, a gruesome and glorious disaster, and it was everything Kakashi could have wanted from it. I'm not saying you are a poor fighter, I'm saying you cannot compare to me. That is simply your fate. Hyuga Neji was saying this with a cold smile. The boy was very well practiced in his cold mannerisms, from the slight frown he always wore to the dead gaze in his eyes. Kakashi almost giggled when Guy had introduced the boy to him. Neji was perfect for his own needs, and might just gain something out of the bargain himself. He had instructed the 3 genin to show up at the usual training ground he used, and set himself up in the blind to observe them. To her credit, Tenten looked put off by Neji's manner. She had been quite polite when Guy introduced her, and while she had not been deeply enthused to mix and match teams, she had reacted favorably to know she was still working with Neji, and even more so to know she would be getting a break from Guy and Lee's exuberance. She had remained quiet once the argument had started, even as Neji started to glare at the other genin, although several times Kakashi saw her look as if she wanted to say something to the eternally grumpy Hyuga. But whether it was from her desire to not fight with her teammate, or an end result of what appeared to be a mild infatuation with the pale-eyed boy, she never truly spoke up, either for or against him. To his credit, Sasuke had politely introduced himself and had been quite companionable in his own quiet way, at least at first. Then Neji had opened his mouth and issued forth on his opinion of Kakashi, and Guy, and Konohagakura's shinobi training system in general. Sasuke had been surprisingly polite by his standards in refuting Neji's complaints. No blood had been spilled, no matter how sharp his tongue was. Neji apparently took the polite manner as a sign of weakness, and kept pushing. Sasuke, seeing what Neji was doing, pushed back. Eventually, Sasuke had wondered out loud how competent someone like Neji could be, which had led to this latest little gem. If you had been trained by the tutors I had, you would know of your own weakness, Uchiha, and the weakness of your master. Sasuke's eyes shifted slightly to one side, just a little, but enough to give the game away if either of the others noticed. The kunoichi was looking down at the ground, too abashed by the argument to look him in the eye, and Neji was staring at him with a cold and arrogant smirk, far too occupied with his seeming victory to notice Sasuke's moment of inattention. Sasuke then looked straight at Kakashi's hiding place while he politely asked Neji for more details on Kakashi's weaknesses. Kakashi held out his arm from the blind, thumb up, and started silently making his way towards the 3 shinobi. Neji, meanwhile, scoffed and crossed his arms, standing straight and tall like a teacher talking down to his students. He's always late to everything, no matter how important. He wastes your time, and mine, in doing so. He is very intelligent, I grant you, but he is far too willing to take things easy and cut people slack. And from what I hear, death seems to follow him on every mission, claiming his friends and allies casually. His voice rose, dripping with sarcasm. I am sure that he could have prevented those deaths, if he tried, but that's too much to ask for such a lazy sensei. I will be here, as required of me by my own fool of a teacher, but I will learn nothing of value. Sounds about right, said Kakashi quietly, his mouth inches from the Hyuga's right ear. Neji did not turn to face Kakashi, did not act startled in any way that Kakashi could see, which was itself telling. A surprised shinobi would turn quickly and give away their shock. An unsurprised shinobi would turn slowly, to prove their foreknowledge and prove they had no fear. But someone who was surprised, and had just enough control, would freeze as they faced the sudden surprise, and then Neji turned around. Behind the boy, Kakashi could see Sasuke smirking, and Tenten looking mortified. "You were spying on us," said Neji flatly. Kakashi nodded. "Any good sensei would spy on his students, because what they say about him when he is not around would be a greater truth. After all," he said, slipping his left arm around Neji's shoulders and giving him a companionable shake, "how else will we know that we're nothing but a self-serving, time-wasting asshole, or a green-clad moron who has muscles to spare and too much focus on his useless, crippled little orphan?" Kakashi's eye narrowed dangerously. "Seeing as we're all being ever so honest with each other, maybe I should tell you what I see before me as well?" Neji nodded with a grimace. He'd been caught in a neat little trap, and he knew it. To refuse would be to eat his words, and he would not lose face in such a cowardly manner. He was certain he could refute Kakashi's words after the man was done. Kakashi turned to Sasuke, turning Neji along with him. "My student first, naturally. It's only fair. I see a young man driven to succeed. Sometimes he's so driven, he forgets that he is still a young man, and has to live his life as such. But to his credit, he has learned much under my guidance, and maybe, someday, he just might have a chance at being half as smart as I am." Sasuke glowered, but after a moment, his lips turned upward, and after another moment, it became a smirk, an open declaration of war, a challenge given and silently accepted. Kakashi turned them both to Tenten, who was starting to fidget. Kakashi thought back to the files Guy had given him and found something plausible to say. "And here, we see a young woman who wants to be strong, so much so that she will tolerate things I shudder to consider. Like Guy and Lee. Together. Training." Tenten shuddered, and Kakashi found himself fighting down a grin. "And in spite of her desire to specialize in weapons, she showed up here today with the intent to learn from someone that her own sensei, Guy, the best taijutsu master in Konohagakure, suggested could help her. In time, I think she will succeed in her goal of becoming a strong kunoichi, in spite of the challenges she faces in training and in life." Tenten looked a little surprised, and blushed under the final compliment, so Kakashi gave himself a little mental pat on the back. His words amounted to little more than a cold reading on the situation, but giving her encouragement to branch out a little was one of the requests Guy had made of him, and you generally catch more flies with honey. Wasps, however, get swatted. Kakashi swung Neji around to face him, putting the boys back to the other genin. "And then there is you, a child so certain in his superiority, he will openly speak out against those who would train him, about things he knows nothing about, and is not even smart enough to use his perfect perception to look around and check for the people he's talking about." The last was delivered in Kakashi's coldest voice, his one visible eye glaring. "I can train you to use techniques, but I cannot train you to think, not if you are so incompetent that you cannot bring yourself to try." Kakashi stepped past Neji, who was frozen in place, his face remaining blank even as his hands clenched tight. He raised one hand, tapping the forehead protector he wore over his Sharingan eye and looking at Sasuke, who nodded. The young Uchiha circled around the still immobile Hyuga and moved a few feet away, dragging Tenten along with him. Then Kakashi, his back still turned, said, "Should you want training, you'll now have to earn it. Impress me. Show me the strength of your family. I'll keep my eye covered to preserve your limited techniques, although I've seen more than enough Hyuga fight to make your limited capabilities uninteresting." He turned and crossed his arms, narrowing his one visible eye and letting his tone of voice to rise slightly as if in mockery. "Begin when ready or walk away, coward!" Neji nodded once, and Kakashi had to give him credit, the boy did not hesitate. He lunged forward, his eyes already active, fast for a first year yet impossibly slow against someone like Kakashi. Kakashi stepped back, a single step, rotating his body to evade each blow with minimal effort. Sasuke watched with his Sharingan activated, staring intently at both the fighters as his eyes took in every detail. Tenten looked fit to be sick, her eyes darting between combatants as if unsure who to cheer for. And Kakashi, after a full minute, took another step back to give himself just enough time to pull out his favorite book and flip it open. After a further 2 minutes, he started to parry instead of just evade, his arms spinning in a strange dance that seemed to match Neji's moves perfectly. "Kata will not suffice, Hyuga. I have seen all 312 of the base kata of the gentle fist style. Try something new." Neji managed to move even faster after that, but Kakashi's dance still matched his own perfectly, even without his Sharingan exposed, even when Neji abandoned katas and began to improvise. Eventually Neji stopped, breath ragged and hair in disarray, glaring at the jonin, who stared back, his face showing only indifference, his breathing perfectly normal. How can you be so good at my clan's style? Neji demanded, cold fury raising his volume if not his tone. Kakashi shrugged. Impress me tomorrow, and I'll tell you. For today, you are dismissed. Neji snarled, all the more terrible for the boy's previously unchanging face, and he turned and stormed away. Tenten raised her hand, took a step forward, then stopped. She hung her head and turned back to Kakashi, who was watching the departing Hyuga with a sad and knowing glint in his eye. There but for my efforts you go, Sasuke. There is pride, arrogance, and above all, the terminal stupidity of a shinobi who, faced with an unstoppable foe, does not consider doing anything beyond charging blindly into the fray. Sasuke nodded. The lesson was not lost on him. Say nothing about this to anyone, Sasuke. That, too, is part of the lesson I will be teaching him. Kakashi turned to Tenten, who was still looking down at the ground, her eyes slightly bright. Tenten? Tenten straightened to stand at attention, but her body language radiated fear. You have already impressed me. Faced with the choice between trying to comfort your crush, and she winced at that, just slightly, and staying to learn from your temporary sensei, you did exactly what you should do, even if it hurt. He managed to smile, letting it travel all the way up to his eye to ensure she did not miss it because of his mask. I am not unreasonable. I will not punish you for your teammate's folly. I do ask, however, that you say nothing to him about what we trained during these sessions until he joins us in them. Understood? Tenten nodded. Then here is what you shall learn for today. Neji whirled, slapping out with his hands, snarling as Kakashi parried them with ease. You'll never get anywhere with that, Kakashi said, eyes not leaving his book. Maybe tomorrow. Dismissed. Neji broke his kata, snapping out with a kick in the midst of a routine. Kakashi barely turned his head. Your stance was broken, Kakashi said quietly, stepping forward to knock the boy down with a leg sweep. It was obvious you were going to swap to a kick. Maybe tomorrow. Dismissed. Neji lunged forward, both hands out, abandoning all pretense of defense for one single hopeful strike. It had been a full week now. When doing team missions, Tenten had been desperate to talk about her training, and at the same time, desperate not to bring it up at all. Apparently, Kakashi and Sasuke were training her in some basic fire release jutsu. Kakashi had mentioned that her tool-heavy fighting style would be quite effective if the right tools were used with the right sort of jutsu, and Training Ground 3 was quickly gathering a series of large but shallow depressions of charred dirt from her practice. Lee had shouted gleefully about the fires of youth in Tenten, then asked politely what Neji had learned. Neji had turned away and refused to talk, refused to look at Guy's face, which had a grave appearance whenever their eyes met. Finally, at the end of the week, in the midst of the daily fight, Neji had enough. He lunged without any plan, just trying to hit Kakashi. Kakashi slapped aside his hand and then brought an elbow down on the boy's head hard, driving him to the ground. His face smashed into the dirt, grinding the filth into his smooth skin, and he lay there panting while Kakashi stood over him in judgment. You were careless. You dropped your defenses for an uncertain chance. Kakashi's voice was cold. I am not impressed by suicide attempts, doubly so for ones that have no real chance of success, and I have seen far too many of my friends and allies die to that ridiculous notion. To think that such a pointless effort would impress me, just because it is you, Hyuga, is arrogance of the highest order. Neji snarled and rose again, lashing out wildly. He never noticed the look on Tenten's face, on Sasuke's face. He never noticed the strange, reverberating sound, or the blue glow. He spun around, preparing another attack, then stopped dead. And arrogance kills. The blue glow around Kakashi's arm faded, the birds stopped their chorus, and Kakashi's hand curled inward, snagging the neatly severed edge of Neji's forehead protector, pulling it away from his brow to reveal his family's curse seal. Kakashi tossed the broken forehead protector to the ground. I know of that seal, Hyuga Neji. I know of the two branches in your family, the servants and the leaders, and how they are decided. And yes, I disapprove. Kakashi stepped back and lowered his arms. Tell me, Neji, how many of your clansmen know the sealing technique? Neji's mind was frozen, unable to operate. He had felt the leather part under Kakashi's strike, had felt his hair sever from his temple, had felt the artificial breeze as the power of Kakashi's own creation, the infamous Chidori, passed so close to his skin that it tingled with residual energy. Never before had he faced a foe who could kill him on a whim, and had so clearly demonstrated it. After a few moments, Kakashi stepped forward and laid his hand, the same hand, on his shoulder. How many? Said Kakashi, quiet as the grave. 3 to 6, said Neji, shocked. He shook his head, then looked up at Kakashi. It depends on how far the apprentices for the main house have gotten in their training. The art of the seal is rare in our family, as it is in much of Konohagakure. If you wanted the practice of the curse seal to end, and internal politics failed, how would you ensure that art was lost? Kill them, Neji said without hesitation. And if it came to that, could you take them with your family techniques? Neji opened his mouth to reply with hot and angry assurances, then snapped it shut. This man, this outsider, had flawlessly evaded him, without any clan training. Those who learned the sealing technique were highly placed in the clan, and generally old enough to have a great deal of experience. No. Kakashi nodded. Change does not happen when you follow people's expectations, but when you defy them. If you cannot match their experience in a gentle fist battle, you do not get into a gentle fist battle. And to do that, you need something other than the gentle fist. That is why I thought to send you to me for training. Neji's mind was whirling with thoughts, options, considerations. Kakashi was right. If nothing else worked, there was always the choice to trade his life to end the practice. But to do that, he'd have to strike with precision, speed, and surprise, or they would only turn his own seal against him. And the only way to do that and succeed would be to pick them off as an assassin, one at a time, in a manner they could not predict. And then his thought process crashed completely as Kakashi leaned in and mumbled. Did you check the area before publicly declaring a blood feud with your own clan? Neji stepped back, eyes widening as his Byakugan activated and spinning in place to ensure that his tiny blind spot would be no hindrance. His eyes, veins bulging, took in every detail in every direction for a full 50 meters, looking through every rock and tree and leaf, looking at every tiny speck of chakra. In the end, those few humans without his range appeared uninterested in them, and none were of his family or their more immediate allies. To assume nobody was listening, as you plotted murder, was arrogant. And arrogance kills. Thankfully, I was keeping an eye out for myself as well. Neji's mind swam, his eyes blurred, as he tried to regain his center. So many shocks, so quickly together, was disorienting, maddening, and he found himself having trouble just think about what to say or do. So, said Kakashi, his voice slowly becoming friendly, how do you train against people who would use gentle fist against you? Neji just stared at Kakashi, unable to think under the weight of his confusion and anger and hurt pride. Kakashi laughed at the boy's bewildered face and gently pulled Neji around to face Sasuke. You find a partner who can steal fighting styles, and show them how it works. Sasuke took his cue. He had been expecting it, even though he and Kakashi had not discussed it previously. He bowed to Neji and started performing katas from the gentle fist style, the very ones he had watched Neji performing all week. Neji felt a sting in his heart, watching that thief as he used his stolen knowledge, and it hit him like a ton of bricks. You planned this in advance, he said, his mind clearing under the heat of his anger and shame. You planned to humiliate me, to crush my spirit, to turn me against my family. Kakashi shook his head, a negative. I planned to humiliate you, to crush your spirit, so that if you ever had to turn against your family, you had a chance to succeed. You cannot climb above your current place if you cannot see the ladder above you. Neji could not get his mind to work properly. He was awash in emotion, uncertain, and unable to return to the calm state he worked so hard to cultivate. Tenten walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder, and this time, when he looked at her, he did not see a subpar fighter, jealous of his strength, but a friend, witnessing the pain of his weakness. He wondered how he had not seen that before. He dropped to his knees and bowed deeply to Kakashi, his forehead resting on the cool dirt at his feet. I am a fool for refusing your aid, and a fool for speaking poorly of you without knowing your capabilities. I ask you to teach me, Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi could not help himself. He giggled, just slightly. A Hyuga asking for aid, from a position of overt weakness? I am impressed. Chapter 18, Make Break. Kakashi's Secret. So, I hear nobody has ever drunk you under the table? Demanded a voice from behind his seat at the bar. Kakashi turned in his booth, where he had been discussing future training possibilities with Kurenai, and looked at the woman sitting behind him. The girl was shorter than he was, with a mass of purple hair pulled back and tied haphazardly. She was smirking at him from the other booth, and Kakashi noted that more than a few sake containers sat empty on her table. He realized that he knew this woman, and with that realization came a small internal sigh. Kakashi was passingly familiar with Mitarashi Anko. The girl had been an apprentice to Orochimaru of the Sannin, and when he had fled the village, he had dragged her along. They eventually found her again, with no memory of the recent past and a curse seal that did nothing but cause her pain before it had been locked down by another seal placed around it. She worked in the torture and interrogation section of the shinobi forces, the only place where her reputation as the student of a traitor seemed to be accepted. Her reputation for being a woman without style or class, however, was well earned by her lack of manners, and her outfit did little to discourage that sort of opinion. Kakashi was suspicious of Anko, not because of her past, but because her habits fit her role as a tough girl a little too closely to be genuine. She worked regularly with Marino Ibiki, and he had a thing for mind games and role-playing during interrogations. Kakashi idly wondered who played the good cop during those times. Someone has been telling tales from Anbu, Mitarashi-san. Care to say who? His eye darted to his own companion, who was smirking. How do they ever have the energy to do this to me, he thought. One would think that jonin, in life or death situations often enough to astound any outsider, would be more serious or grim, but in Kakashi's experience, they tended to be far more troublesome than any genin squad, mostly because they were so good at causing trouble. Nope, but sounds like I found the right white-haired shinobi, at least. Anko smirked and turned fully in her seat, stopping to tug at the edges of her long coat, conveniently revealing her skimpy fishnet shirt. Kakashi managed to hold back a sigh at such an amateur act, and let his eye dip down slightly. He heard Kurenai grunt behind him, signaling she saw his eye move. That's what you get for setting this up, he quietly thought to himself. Anko leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. I saw you checking the goods, she said with a smirk. Even the ever-stoic Hatake-san cannot resist my bountiful charms. She leaned fully across the back of the booth, leering in a manner she probably thought was suggestive, but which came across as predatory instead. If you're a good boy, maybe you'll get another peek during the contest. Kakashi resisted the urge to roll his eye and turned to face Kurenai. I'm not getting out of here without another ridiculous contest, am I? He said in leaden tones. Kurenai shook her head, smiling slightly. We're only here today, now, to discuss training, because you set up this encounter, aren't we? She nodded, her grin growing. And she's just tenacious enough to bug me for the rest of my life if I don't just get it over with, isn't she? Damn right, said Anko, slipping into their booth next to Kurenai, setting down 2 bottles of sake in front of them. Drinking contest. 1 for 1. First to fall over or spew loses. She poured 2 saucers, then lifted her own. You're no better than guys sometimes, I swear. He muttered to Kurenai, who at least had the decency to look miffed at that comparison. Kakashi turned to Anko and stared at her. Stakes, he said flatly. He who knew better than to accept without knowing the goal of this particular attempt to ferret out his secrets. I win, Anko said with a smile. And you let me see what's under your mask. Declined. And she knows it. Anko shrugged and took a sip from Kurenai's cup. Kakashi pushed his opinion of the specialist jonin up slightly. There was no way he would ever agree to that, and the way she brushed off his refusal, she knew ahead of time she would be denied. Either she had been very well coached on this, or she had done her research. I win, she said after a moment. And you take me on a date. She smirked at him. Declined. What's the game here? Most people could be pressured into agreement if given a much more acceptable request after an initial refusal. In theory, Mitarashi-san should have made such an offer immediately in the hope of his acceptance. But Kakashi's unwillingness to do anything even remotely romantic was as infamous as his desire to keep his mask on at all times, and rumor told him that both were prime objectives amongst some of his former Anbu allies. Anko stopped to think for a moment, tapping her finger on the table. Fine. I win, and you let me read that book you're always looking at. Kakashi opened his mouth to agree, but she raised her free hand. Your copy, Hatake Kakashi, not any random copy. Kakashi shut his mouth and stared at her. Nobody sees my book, that's as solid as the other 2. She keeps trying to increase the pressure on me. Never go along with another person's plan. It would do little enough harm if she saw, but still. I will agree, if you promise to never tell anyone else what you see in it. Anko nodded, smiling like the cat who got the mouse. She raised the saucer to her lips, then lowered it slightly. And my stakes? She asked, going for another leer. Maybe you want to see a little more of Anko-chan? She leaned forward, arms tucked under her chest to bring forward her assets. She is really, really bad at this seduction thing. This time, Kakashi did not let his eye move. I win, and you never challenge me to a drinking contest again. Anko's eyes darted over to Kurenai. Yes, said Kakashi, letting a little of his tired frustration into his voice. That's why she roped you into this. You, and the previous 5 women. And it's always women, I might add, Kakashi said to Kurenai, who was sitting in her spot and quietly exuding an air of innocence. And they always try the seduction routine on the infamous pervert Hatake Kakashi. One would think you were trying to set me up again, Yuhi-san. I accept, said Anko, smirking at Kurenai, who was smirking a little herself. Kakashi sighed and raised his own saucer. Let's get this over with. Enko stared in confusion as Kakashi drank the sake through his face mask. Kurenai meanwhile was watching him very closely, like she always did during these little moments. For some reason, the mask was always a thing for everyone he met. He'd heard rumor that there was a bounty back in Anbu for his mask or a picture of him without it. Those rumors claimed that everyone from the owner of the ramen stand Naruto loved so much to Danzo Shimura himself had chipped into the pot. After he developed his another mask routine, where he pulled down his mask on request to show another mask beneath it, the Hokage had confirmed the rumor, and had added to the pot, telling Kakashi that it was good practice for the newer members of Anbu and impossible problem solving and a morale boost for the older ones who got the free entertainment of watching the new members try to collect. Kakashi set his saucer down, his face the same literally emotionless mask as before he began to drink, and said, "Your turn." Kakashi looked at Enko, who was leaning back in the booth with her head leaning over the edge and into the booth behind her, her eyes closed, her breathing even but heavy. He'd called for her to drink 3 times, and she had yet to react. "I'm going to assume we're done here, Kurenai. Please pull her forward. That's unhealthy." Kurenai reached out and pulled on Enko's jacket slightly, until the girl slumped forward onto the table with a solid thump, upsetting her last saucer of sake as she did so. Kakashi shook his head. "Less than 2 bottles? You've become desperate, Kurenai. You usually choose champion drinkers." The red-eyed woman sighed, but she nodded in agreement as well. "What would it take to get you to just tell me how you do that? I've seen you drink enough to kill a civilian, yet I've never seen you so much as burp, never mind stumble. How on earth can you drink that much?" Kakashi kept the surprise from his face. "All you want to know is how I drink so well? Not what I look like without the mask, or how I eat and drink though it." Kurenai nodded glumly. The choices are to either tell her, and end this stupid routine once and for all, or keep quiet, and have to deal with damaging someone's liver every few months. Not a hard choice. He leaned forward conspiratorially, raising one hand in a theatrical manner, as if imparting a great secret. "Promise to never set up another drinking contest with me, and that you'll never tell anyone else about it, and I'll tell you how I keep winning the drinking contests. It'll save us both the grief from repeating this over and over again." Kurenai nodded in agreement, and leaned forward expectantly. Kakashi tugged his mask slightly away from his face and squeezed it, releasing more than a little liquid. "The fabric is absorbent, as is my undershirt, which it is connected to. I drank maybe a single saucer's worth tonight. The rest is either in my shirt, or slowly pooling on the floor at my feet." "You cheated," said Kurenai, her face grim. "I cheated," he said, his smile reaching his eyes for the first time that night. Enko's head immediately popped up from the table, her eyes clear and her smile huge. "You cheated," she crowed at the top of her voice as Kakashi leaned back in surprise. "Ha! You should have waited for the contest to be over rather than assuming it was, then." She smirked at Kurenai, who looked quite pleased with herself. "Cheating is as good as a loss. Let's see the book, Hatake-san. Or are you going to welch on a bet?" Kakashi fumed quietly. He could probably argue that she had not responded to her turn of the challenge and lost before the confession, but it would not matter. Fine, he said, waving his hand. "You win. I'll show you, and only you, my book." Kakashi and Enko swapped back to her booth, and after a careful look around to ensure nobody else was watching, Kakashi reached into his bag and pulled out his well-thumbed copy of Ika Paradise and handed it over. Enko smirked triumphantly and opened the book, then frowned. She flipped one page, then another, then began to thumb through them quickly. She opened her mouth to complain, then stopped under the heat of his glare. "No trick. That's the real deal. Our little secret," he said. "Or would you welch on a debit?" Enko slowly handed the book back, staring aghast at Kakashi, then turned around in the booth to face Kurenai, who had been desperately trying not to show any interest in what was going on. "You're buying," Enko said. "I need a drink." It had taken 2 more bottles before Enko started to wobble a little. It took another 2 before her words started to slur. And it took 1 more bottle before she finally stopped going on about how she could not believe Kakashi owned that book. Kurenai had gotten up to leave around that point, stopping only to point out to Kakashi that a gentleman who wanted to sleep easy with his mask on would see the poor drunk woman home. He would have taken her opinion more seriously if he didn't see her wink at Enko, who was very, very careful not to react, but who also went through the trouble of slowly crawling out of the booth, showing off her curves in a number of highly impractical poses while doing so, before finally tripping over her coat with a very obvious pratfall and stumbling into him. "Can't wait to get share mitts on me, eh?" she slurred, rubbing against his arm as she tried to pull herself up his body. Kakashi merely shook his head and went to pay his tab. The 2 of them made it down a single street before Enko had to make an emergency stop at the side of the road. The next street, she started to wobble so bad that he was forced to pull her arm over his shoulders and walk with her. By the fourth street, she managed to fall over in spite of his help. Kakashi sighed and helped her up, dragging her arm back over his shoulder to help her stay up. "You just want to feel," she said, clenching the same arm tight over his shoulders and leaning into him. "Midarashi-san, you have been fairly throwing yourself at me most of the night, and I half suspect it's all Kurenai's fault. You've seen inside my book, so I think you know by now that your charms are not so effective as you might think." Enko snorted. "Maybe I find you cute, Kakashi-chan. And I find you are seriously drunk." Enko nodded sagely, then stumbled away from him slightly, and pulled a little book out of her jacket. She started flipping through it casually, and it took Kakashi a few moments to realize it was his book, and she'd apparently picked his pockets for it at some point. "Yeah, be you this. She shut the book and waved it at him. This thing. Unreal. Never guessed. Nobody believe it." He snatched it from her roughly, then pulled her arm back over his shoulder and marched her along. "Our secret though, right?" Enko nodded and leered at him. "Our secret." The next day, Kakashi set up Sasuke and Tenten to practice after the morning disappointment with Neji, then pulled out his book and flipped it open. He giggled slightly and turned a page to look at the next crisp sheet of blank white paper. Everyone knew that Kakashi was a pervert. Everyone knew, because he was always reading that perverted book, that book that anyone could buy or even look up in the library. And they always got their own copy, and looked and assumed. Eventually, when in the fullness of time they wanted to distract him, they always tried for seduction because Kakashi was so obviously a pervert, and he obliged them with wandering eyes and carefully held breaths. It was a very convenient way to tell when a woman was trying to manipulate him, and it boggled Kakashi's mind that none of them questioned it. Kakashi gave another false giggle and flipped another page. Only unlike every other page in the book, this page was no longer blank. Instead, across the page in an uneven scrawl was a message that Kakashi had completely failed to see her write in his book. "Had fun. Not nearly as drunk as you think. I see your act, and raise you mine. Try again? Enko." Chapter 19, A Rescue Mission. In Konoha. "I don't see any sentries," said Sakura into her radio. She was crouched in the bushes, deep in the forest, looking across the empty clearing to the wooden palisade that had been erected there overnight. There were no men positioned on the 5-foot-high wall of wooden planks, none at the small gate. The entire area was suspiciously quiet, although she could hear quiet conversation in the distance. "There has to be some," Sasuke muttered back. He was positioned to the rear, where a second, smaller gate was located. "They can't possibly have left the gates unguarded. Any news from Kiri?" Sakura looked around, and saw no signs of her companion. "Not back yet," she said quietly. "Stand by." Sakura shifted slightly in her hiding place to keep her muscles loose and tried not to worry too much. She knew Kiri would have to be slow and cautious when she was sent out to spy on the fort, but it had been nearly an hour, and she was worried for her companion. No sooner did she finish that thought that she left her cat land lightly on her back from the branch above her. Kiri made a very quiet sound, half meow, half purr, and stood in front of Sakura, one paw raised, with a single claw. "Any sentries?" Sakura asked. Kiri etched a rough square in the dirt, and made 2 small squares to represent the 2 gates. She tapped twice on each square, once on either side of the square. When Sakura did not reply, the cat drew a second square, divided in 2 with a line, and tapped once each, on either side of the square, halfway along its length. Sakura looked at the fort again, then nodded. The gates were double doors, roughly carved, and now that she knew to look for it, she could see the small holes on either side of the gate, peepholes for guards. "Any to the sides?" she asked, tapping the sides without gates on the map. Kiri's eyes narrowed, and she drew all 4 claws and made a slash mark on each of the remaining sides. "Good girl," Sakura said, and her pride was obvious in her voice and smile. Kiri knew better than to purr while on duty, so she settled for grooming herself contentedly while Sakura relayed that information to Sasuke. "Copy," said Sasuke after a moment. "I see the holes. Radio when you are prepared to move." Sakura did not waste time in replying, but immediately started her slow sliding movements to back into the woods. Once she was certain she could not be seen, she moved quietly through the trees until she was aligned with one corner of the fort. Kiri, she knew, would already be on the other corner, ready for her own move. Sakura reached up and clicked her radio once. Her vantage point was perfect, and she saw the forest to the rear of the fort become illuminated. The plan was simple. Sasuke would nail one of the sentries with his plasma lance as a distraction, and in that moment of surprise Sakura would quietly assault the front. She darted forward, running first to the corner of the palisade, then along the front of it, towards the gate. When she got within a few feet of the peephole, she turned and ran up the wall itself, her final step launching herself into the air. She saw, in the center of the fort, a small building, with maybe a dozen rooms at most, and a roof access. She also saw 3 guards on that roof. 2 had turned to the rear, where the gate was being pulled open in spite of the fire eating at it. The 3rd was looking in her direction, as a good guard should, and Sakura pegged him with a kunai before his mouth could open fully. They reached the apex of her leap, and as she began to fall, she saw the 2 gate guards on her side, also looking back at the building. Bad luck for them, she thought, a feral smile on her lips. The one immediately below her never had time to react. She landed, full force, her feet landing on his shoulders. She felt his shoulder blades break, and she fell forward in a tumble. She rose, then dropped to all fours as the other guard swung the thin club in his hands at her, the air whistling. His mouth was opening, and Sakura tried to draw a kunai and throw it, but she was still dodging his swing, and her hand missed her leg holster. Then Kiri arrived, dropping from above just like Sakura had. It landed on the guard's head, back claws digging into the flesh of his neck while the front latched onto the man's eyes and dug in. Sakura winced, and the man opened his mouth to scream before he vanished in a puff of smoke. Sorry for that memory, Naruto, she thought as she turned and ran for the building. She could hear the shouts at the rear gate, saw another flash of light, and even louder shouting. Ahead was the building, with a series of unglazed windows and a single door. Sakura ignored the door by default, assuming it was trapped somehow, and instead jumped through a window. She tumbled to her feet, a kunai in each hand, and spun quickly. There was only a single doorway leading out of the room, and a quick glance outside showed a short hallway going half the length of the building. She grunted twice, barely hard enough to disturb the air, and left Kiri pass her legs to scout the darker corners. After a few moments, Kiri returned and sat on the right side of the hall. She tapped the right side wall twice, then unsheathed her claws and tapped the wall twice more. Finally, she twitched her tail against the wall. Sakura translated the code in her head. 2 doors down, 2 targets, and the objective. Kiri had shown no skill in vocal code, so they had settled for 1 based off movement, and while it relied on sight, it was quiet. Sakura nodded, then raised her hand, palm reversed, and closed her hand into a fist. Kiri's eyes narrowed, but she obliged Sakura and jumped back out the window. The rule said that Kiri was fair game in combat, and Sakura did not want to risk the small cat's body more than she had to for a training exercise. She took a deep breath, and started to run. She turned into the 3rd room to the right, arm already cocked for the throw, and saw them. 2 copies of Naruto were standing on either side of a chair, in which sat Kakashi, his arms bound with handcuffs, quietly reading that pervert book of his. Each copy of Naruto held a short stick, a stand-in for a kunai, and one turned to kill Kakashi with his stick while the other stepped forward to throw his own. Priorities. Sakura threw her kunai, the one in her right hand, at the clone attacking Kakashi, and was pleased to see the second clone miss his chance to deflect it. The clone with Kakashi vanished, his stick dropping to the ground. The remaining clone threw his stick, which Sakura dodged by dropping to all 4, then lunging forward. Naruto drew a second stick from his holster and lashed out, striking downward to hit the crouching kunoichi, but she pushed up with all 4 limbs, sailing over his strike and landing on the clone. A quick thrust of her kunai, and that clone was gone too. I am Haruno Sakura, I am here to rescue you, she said quietly, reciting the phrase intended to replace the difficulty of untying a captive. Come with me if you want to live. Kakashi nodded silently, then stood and began to follow her. She led him out the front door, listening carefully to the sound of the still raging battle to the rear. Sasuke had been charged with distracting the army as long as possible, and the army had been forbidden from using ninja arts, so the fight was excessively one-sided, by the sound of it. Kakashi was also required to act as a civilian, and the slow walk he used to cross the distance to the front gate was torturous to Sakura. She kept moving, her eyes shifting rapidly, watching for any possible attack. When he finally arrived, she blew out a small sigh, and turned to open the gate, then felt a stick tap her in the back. She froze, her face going taut, then she turned, glaring, as Kakashi grinned and tapped her again with the stick. And from the building came a loud shout, Kakashi's voice. End exercise! The Kakashi in front of her rubbed the back of his head and said, Sorry, Sakura-chan. You lied. Sakura was not amused, to say the least. She was fuming, and by the look of it, so was Kiri, perched on her shoulder. You said that the opposing army was not allowed to use jutsu. I said that to you, yes. Kakashi was smiling behind his mask. At times, he really enjoyed his job, and this was one of them. He was finding that there was a great deal of pleasure to be found in teaching those who actually learned. And then I took the original Naruto aside, and I told him there was one exception. He could have one shinobi in his forces. So you made him a decoy, said Sasuke, smirking slightly at Naruto, who was grinning cheerfully. Yeah, Naruto said, stretching his arms behind his head. One of the things I have been working on with Gai-sensei and Kakashi-sensei was how to work with expectations. You guys expected an army, and I knew what you expected. So I worked with it, and gave you what you wanted, one captive, willing to follow you. Kakashi ruffled the blonde's head and smiled. Why did I change the rules, Sakura Sasuke? Sakura's face was practically glowing with her blush, but she clenched her teeth and bore down on her anger. I got complacent. Kakashi nodded. You got complacent, and you died. Never assume intelligence is correct. Always question where it comes from. And always assume that everyone is a shinobi like you. Sasuke was frowning slightly. I understand, he said. But that must make it hard to interact with civilians, on a personal level. He had been reading a lot of books lately, recommended by Kakashi, and many of them involved human interaction. Hardly subtle, sensei, but I can't blame you for hammering me over the head with it. After the first week working with Neji, Sasuke had a great deal more appreciation for his teacher. It does, said Kakashi, a touch of sadness in his voice. You will find, as you get older, it is hard for shinobi to interact with civilians. A fellow shinobi would understand if you got paranoid and fingered a kunai while talking to them in strange circumstances. A civilian would not. There are exceptions to this rule, but in general, shinobi and civilians do not get along, not because of dislike, or even real distrust, but because of our nature. We are trained to assume the worst, and we live in a world where your friend might be a foe under a henge. Most civilians cannot understand this, not to a degree where they can really be allies or friends. This is also why shinobi tend to stick with other shinobi when it comes time to make a family. Sakura nodded her head, her mind already passing over her memories of home with this new idea. She recalled how her parents reacted when she flinched at a loud noise, how they tried to make light of their daughter walking through the kitchen with a kunai in her hand after a neighbor kid broke a window, and she assumed it was someone breaking in. She understood now why her parents had tried to discourage her from the life of a shinobi. Naruto crossed his arms and grumbled. You're saying I can't trust Tsuchi? Or I am? Kakashi chuckled lightly at that. I said there are exceptions. When I first started training you, and found out how often you visited and seeing how well they treated you, I went through the trouble of investigating the place. I was in the middle of their stock room, hanging on the ceiling and looking through their financial records, when Tsuchi walked in from the front to get something. He did not so much as jump from my appearance. He greeted me, and warned me not to let I am notice or she'd hit me, ninja or not. He then left without a backward glance. After telling me I had best take care of Naruto, and the two of us discussing arrangements for positive reinforcement. Kakashi kept the last part to himself. He needed it less often now, but he still kept an account at Ichiraku's for those times where Naruto needed some brothy encouragement. Either he was once a shinobi, which I could find no evidence of, or he understands our ways enough to not be offended. You can trust them as much as you can trust a fellow shinobi, I suspect. Just do what you should always do, and keep an eye out, in case an enemy tries to strike at you while wearing their appearance. Naruto grumbled again, but he nodded. Kakashi turned to Sasuke, ready to continue the debriefing on the fight, then paused and looked at the sky. Above, he could a hawk passing overhead, a brown hawk with a single white dot on each wing. Oh ho, is it that time already? You three are dismissed for the day. He pointed. That is a messenger hawk, and it carries news I have been waiting on for a few weeks, I think. I'll let you know tomorrow if it is. Kakashi made a single sign, then vanished in a swirl of leaves and smoke. Sakura was about to leap away, Kirai firmly latched onto the back of her shirt, that had been reinforced heavily after a few too many claw marks on her shoulder, when Sasuke raised a hand at her and Naruto. We should go get a meal together, the three of us. Sakura and Naruto had stared in shock, and Sasuke frowned, as if he was going to change his mind. After a moment, however, he managed a small smile. I hear a lot of teens share meals regularly, and talk. Debriefing was cut short, maybe we can discuss it together. Sakura had to bite down the urge to squeal in glee. It wasn't a date, not with Naruto there, but it was something, and her interest in the Uchiha had not faded away, even as she worked to keep it hidden. She opened her mouth to react, when Naruto spoke up. Who are you, and where is Sasuke? Sasuke huffed. It's me, Dobe. I'm trying to be nice. Yeah, said Naruto, waving his hand. But when are you that nice? We get along okay now, you're an okay guy, But we've never hung out outside of training and mission time, and that's got me worried you've been replaced by a face-stealing spirit or something. Sakura wanted to defend Sasuke, but Naruto was right. Sasuke had been polite in the past, and even friendly. He talked to her when she hit Inari, and when she was upset over her first kill, he'd stood watch outside her tent, a tact offer of companionship when she needed it. But Sasuke was not the sort to seek out companionship, and Naruto had spotted it. As much as it bothered her, Sakura's arm tensed slightly, ready to grab a kunai in case Naruto's hunch was correct. Sitting on her shoulder, Kiri ran her tail along Sakura's back in a coded question, asking if the black-haired boy was a threat. Sasuke sighed, and planted his fists on his hips. Fine, so I've been quiet. And I've been distant. It's who I am. But, you know how we've been training separately? I met someone, one of my training partners, who remind me of myself. His eyes grew distant, and he looked to the ground for a moment. In a bad way. I don't want to be like them. And if that means watching Naruto eat like a pig, it's a small price to pay. Naruto started shouting, and Sasuke smirked and talked back to him. The argument had carried all the way to Ichiraku's, where it had switched to a fresh argument about real food, which ran all the way until Naruto started to eat at the barbecue they ended up at. Then an argument started about if Sakura won her eating contest with Naruto, as Kiri had eaten some as well. That argument lasted until they reached the centermost part of town. But the three of them had smiled, even as the arguments grew heated, and they all agreed to meet once per week for a meal. The team had become comfortable for the three of them. They parted, still arguing, with friendly goodbyes intermingled with shouted words, and each went home with a light heart. Iruka had been present for the final debriefing on Kakashi and Kurenai's joint training, as well as the results so far on Gai's combined training. It was a benefit of being useful to the Hokage in his personal war with the mountains of paperwork he faced each day. You knew things. It hurt, knowing his cute little student, his secretly favorite student, was growing so fast, in a world that required death and suffering as much as the shinobi world did. But he was being well guided on his path. He raised no objection when Kakashi suggested his team was ready for the exam. So, there's going to be an exam, starting next week, Kakashi said, when they met the next morning. Chapter 20, Set the Board. Team 7 was not impressed when they found the crowd gathered on the second floor of the school, considering they had been instructed to go to the third floor. Nor were they particularly impressed with the two fake students acting as guards, trying to talk potential entrants out of continuing onward. But they were impressed with the two combined. The guards indirectly reinforced the illusion, thought Sasuke as he watched Tenten take a blow to the face when she asked politely to advance. Even if others spot the illusion, they may assume it is a trick involving the guards, not the location. And if they become suspicious of the location, well, why else post guards? Sasuke smirked, just slightly, at the layers of misdirection involved. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. This should at least be interesting. Hey! That's Rock Lee! I've been training with him! Naruto ran over to the green-clad shinobi and crouched down. Lee turned to him and smiled, rubbing at his face a little to reveal the fake bruise he had applied after being hit. Naruto-san, I heard you would be part of this year's exam. It's good to see you, but I'm afraid there is a problem. These two students will not let us pass into the exam hall. But to fight outside of permitted times could disqualify us. They both turned to the sound of knuckles cracking behind them. Sakura was standing there, cracking her fingers and smiling cheerfully at the two guards. I wonder if it counts as a pass if we trash the guards, she said out loud. The illusion is skilled, so I suspect these two are not frontline combatants, and we are. She leaned down and patted Lee on the shoulder in a friendly manner. And from what I have heard, your team is just as good at crushing faces as we are, Lee-san. Maybe we should crush faces together. Lee jumped up and gave Sakura his sensei's trademarked Number 4 smile with thumbs. His face slightly reddened with a blush. She was gorgeous, a wild and free woman. He could see the strength in her arms, her legs, how she carried herself. Her hair flowed like the mane of a lion down her neck and halfway down her back. But her eyes were the most attractive, because in those eyes he saw the fires of youth. I am Rock Lee, Konohagakura's wild green beast. You must be the Sakura-san that Naruto is always talking about. Sakura smiled and nodded. Let's date. I will protect you until I die. He looked at her shoulder, where Kirai was sitting, watching him in a bored but bemused manner. And you have such a pretty pussy too. Sakura blinked. Naruto and Sasuke both ducked. You do not know much about talking to women, do you, Lee? Sakura heard Tenten laugh in the background, and saw the boy with the long brown hair who was standing next to Lee grunt in annoyance, so much like Sasuke did that Sakura had to fight to keep her face straight. No, Sakura-san, but together we can learn. Sakura lashed out without warning, and bludgeoned the green-clad idiot on the head with her fist, although she was careful to do so lightly. As if I need protecting. I am Konohagakure's wild-growing cherry blossom. I don't need a protector. My foes need them. She saw the downcast look on his face and decided to show a little mercy. She patted him on the shoulder and gave him a smile. But thank you for the offer. I am sure, in time, you will find someone who needs a guardian as spirited as you, and when you do, I am sure you'll guard her well. She was certain that would be enough to deflect his interest. She was wrong. YOSH. Then I shall defend your honor from all comers. Let every man in Konoha know that to date Sakura-san, you must first defeat me. Lee roared this to the heavens above, which was quite a short distance, as they were inside a school, and the ceiling was quite close. But shouted he nonetheless, for if he must be a spurned love interest, he would be the best sort of spurned love interest. To be any less would be unyouthful. Every person, from the cold-eyed Neji to the deeply mortified Sakura, to the guards, who had watched the entire event play out in shocked silence, shared a moment to palm their faces together. The only exception to this was Naruto, having met Lee before and knowing how outright youthful the boy could be. He would never admit it, but he was trying to memorize that speech, for the next time Sakura turned him down for a date, if only to amuse himself. Sasuke sighed. Having everyone afraid of Sakura going into the exam would have been useful, but now, all he could hope for was some minor trace of empathy from those who observed this little moment. Come on, Sakura, Naruto. We may as well get to the right floor and find a seat. He walked away, giving Neji and Tenten a nod in passing, and getting one in return from the girl. Neji, meanwhile, seemed quite distracted, largely ignoring his surroundings to stare into the distance. Sasuke shuddered slightly and waited for his friends to catch up. As they walked down the hall, Sasuke leaned in slightly, and said quietly, "Watch yourself if we end up fighting the brown-haired boy. He's a Hyuga, like Hinata, but he is also unpleasant. I know Tenten would not deliberately cripple us in a fight, and I doubt Lee would hurt his sweet Sakura-san." Sasuke paused to duck her swatting hand, and smiled. "But he might go all out. If our teams have to fight, focus on him first." Sakura and Naruto nodded, and their eyes held the same message to Sasuke, one of understanding. He had not talked much about his third training partner, but that was telling enough, considering his comments on meeting someone like the old him. The stares of the older applicants when the team stepped into room 301 were intense and suspicious. Team 7 grinned and waved cheerily at the crowd. "You're young," Kakashi had warned them when they decided to take the exam. "You'll be immediately singled out as an easy target. Show no fear. Make them think again." "Sasuke-kun! You're late!" Sasuke spun and stepped back, neatly evading the blonde girl trying to jump on him. Naruto grinned to himself and neatly stepped into the hug, whirling the girl in a short circle. "Ino-chan, you gave me a hug! And today, when I'm going to become a chunin, does this mean we're going to date?" He released her when she shouted and swung a fist at him, ducking the blow and shaking his head in faux sorrow. Ino, Sakura thought with a grimace. She had seen Ino once or twice in the last few months, and the girl seemed as childish and vain as ever. Sakura had been surprised to find herself thinking that way, but then, she had grown up a great deal, hadn't she? Sakura doubted Ino had faced a deadly challenge yet. And now, she might get herself killed, if she's not careful. "Back off, Naruto Baka! I'm here for Sasuke!" Ino's sharp words and tone turned sickening sweet as she turned to Sasuke, who was warily watching the crowd. "I haven't seen you in a while, Sasuke-kun. I've been waiting just for you." Sasuke grunted, just so, and Sakura heard it for what it was, a complete lack of interest, the same thing he used to do to her and Naruto before they were a team. She felt a little warm pride flowing through her, because she had not heard that grunt in weeks. She was worth talking to, which put her a step above every other fangirl out there. "Ino, maybe you should be careful." "Shut up, forehead! I'll do what I want!" Sakura's eye twitched, and she shut up. Ino would just have to hope her teammates could save her when the others attacked, because Sakura decided she'd do nothing to help the girl, who was still shouting insults at her. In short order, the rest of the Konoha rookies had gathered. Sakura and Kiba shouted greetings, and started arguing about whose companion was growing faster, while the two animals shared a look of quiet dislike. Naruto tried to talk to Hinata, found her unresponsive, and a slightly frightening shade of red, then gave up and started chatting with the lazy duo, as he still called them from school. And Shino quietly watched, with pity in his eyes, as Ino badgered Sasuke unceasingly. Eventually, an unfamiliar gray-haired shinobi approached them and advised them to be quiet. Naruto shared a look with his teammates, who both nodded, then promptly flipped the other shinobi off. Not just the gray-haired one, all of them, rotating in place to ensure every single potential Chunin in the room was covered by his twin birds. If you're the kind of coward who needs to pick on rookies, you're gonna be an easy mark. So bite me. And now, I'm the target for every scumbag in the building who comes for us. Naruto grinned at the thought. Sasuke had talent and tools, Sakura had strength and Kirai, but Naruto had stamina, and if they were going to mess with anyone, it would best to have them focus on him first. Guy had explained how tanks worked in infantry battles, and the idea had made a lot of sense to Naruto. Let the guy who can shrug off blows take the blows, let the others do the damage. The gray-haired shinobi stared at Naruto for a moment, then shook his head and walked away. And somewhere in the crowd, one particular shinobi took note of that reaction and started to watch carefully. He gave another shinobi near him an accidental nudge, then apologized as the nudged shinobi walked away. Dosu, the shinobi who had been nudged, hunched his shoulders under the white ruffle on his cloak and turned to his companions. The loudmouth seems to think he is something special. His bandage-wrapped face shifted slightly as he smiled, and his one visible eye glinted with malice. Maybe we should go say hello, one shinobi to another, said Kin, the female of their group. She was the picture of a normal woman, not particularly striking or ugly, just another face in the crowd. The darkness hidden behind that plain face was an unpleasant surprise to some, but to her teammates, it was a useful talent. Sounds amusing enough to be worth it, said Zaku, their third member. He grinned at the short blonde genin and clenched his fists. Dosu could hear, on the very edge of his sense, the sound of air whistling through Zaku's arms, as the boy quietly tested the holes in his arms to ensure they were working. Me first, said Dosu, pulling back his sleeve to reveal the oversized, clunky arm guard he wore. The arm guard was full of carefully placed holes, in a pattern that had taken a great deal of experimentation to get just right. He knew it was right, because he had tested it many times on the special recruits. And when he got it right, his master had tested it on him, to ensure he knew the exact effects. They darted forward, almost unfollowable as they passed through the crowd of applicants. Kin and Zaku paused at the edge of the crowd, while Dosu pressed on, bringing his arm up to strike. Naruto saw the strike coming, saw that it would fall short, so he remained where he was, arms crossed, and smirked as Dosu's fist grazed his nose. His smirk remained until he opened his mouth to talk smack and felt his body convulse slightly. He heard a terrible ringing noise, his eyesight blurring slightly, and his stomach began to rebel. He clenched his fists and tried to hold back. If I give in, it's a sign of weakness. I will. Not, oh crap. He could feel his stomach rolling, and knew he had lost the fight with it, but he refused to look away, to turn his eyes from his foe. So he did the only thing he could. He stared at Dosu, opened his mouth, and spewed on him. He had chosen ramen for breakfast that morning, a special treat for the exam, and the torrent of liquid that came out of him thoroughly drenched the shinobi in front of him. Dosu stared at the blonde, noodles dripping from his face mask, his breath coming in gasps through the filthy and waterlogged bandages that covered most of his face. Zaku and Kin stepped forward, as did Sakura and Sasuke. After a moment, Lee stepped forward as well, his eyes sparkling, and after another moment, Shikamaru sighed and did the same, mumbling to himself. Suddenly, a deep voice roared out from the front of the class, calling them to their seats. Most of the others turned away, grumbling at the loss of entertainment, and many of them now slightly concerned about the loudmouthed blonde genin who literally puked in another shinobi's face. Many of them missed Dosu's parting glare, and all of them missed Naruto's grin. "Sha!" said Naruto, stretching his arms and grinning. "Easy test, that's all that was." Sakura laughed and gave him a swat on the shoulder. "Sure. I saw you sweating bullets in there, Naruto. If that was a real exam, you'd have failed us all, and you know it." The team was wandering towards Ichiraku Ramen, on a slow and casual path that fooled none of them as far as the final destination was concerned, and they were sharing a laugh, because the test had ultimately come down to a test of nerve, the one thing that all three of them possessed. In truth, Sakura had been deeply worried until the final question. All three of them had figured out, quickly, that the test was a test of their ability to cheat. Sasuke had his Sharingan eyes, able to pick up any detail, and Sakura had Kirai, who had glanced casually around the room and started tapping out coded answers quietly on her back with her tail. But at first she had worried about Naruto, who they all readily admitted was not the fastest on the uptake at times, and had continued to worry even after he returned from his restroom break with a satisfied grin. "Not true," argued Naruto, snorting and looking away. "Hinata-chan offered to let me copy her test, and I did have a look before I went back to my own test, in case my clones failed." Naruto had gone to the bathroom almost immediately after the test started, and while the instructor who escorted him gave him very little privacy, it was enough to set up a couple clones, carefully hinged into little pink pucks and dropped into the urinals, to go look up the answers in the library under the guise of a couple random genin he had seen around before but not involved in the test. Oh, she did she? Sakura smirked at Naruto. Maybe you should do something to thank her, Naruto. She did take a risk to keep you around. Naruto nodded, his face serious, almost contemplative. After a few moments, he smacked his fist into his palm and his eyes brightened. I'll introduce her to Rock Lee. I bet they'd get along real good. Sasuke sighed deeply and shared a look with Sakura. How is he that socially inept, he thought, watching the blonde take off at a run, screaming in glee, when they turned the corner and came within view of the ramen shop. He glanced at Sakura after that thought and saw her looking at him with an insufferable grin on her face, a grin perfectly matched by the cat on her shoulder. Okay, fine, I'm not one to judge, now get out of my head. Sakura did not say a word. Her grin said it all, and it did not fade, even as they ducked into the ramen stand and ordered. Kakashi looked up at the door moments before it opened. He and Kurenai had been playing a card game with Asuma, and because they were shinobi, the real game was waiting to see when he would figure out that they were playing together against him. And now we'll never know, he thought with a sigh. The door slid open, and Marino Ibiki stood outside the room, staring at them. Staring at me, thought Kakashi. He knew very little about the exam that Ibiki had put together, but he suspected a lot, based off the man's expertise and previous work. It was probably a pressure cooker, designed to scare potential applicants away. Ibiki was head of the torture and interrogation force in Konohagakure for a reason. He was a master at inflicting fear. So, grunted Asuma, stubbing out his last cigarette and setting aside his cards a little too casually, as if he wasn't being drugged by the other two. How many of ours passed? All of them. Ibiki did not smile, in the least, at that. He just kept staring at Kakashi, cold eyes set in his stony, scarred face. Kakashi sighed. What did Naruto do? Ibiki's stony glare faltered, and he started to laugh. Chapter 21, Into the Forest. Sakura has a plan. Kiri sauntered through the darkness of late-night Konoha, her whiskers twitching slightly. Sakura had been careful to explain her goal, and while it was slightly repugnant, it was also a very good idea for a shinobi to have, and Kiri, above all, wanted to be a shinobi companion. Not that she would ever admit to that level of desire to Sakura. To show that amount of interest would be the same as declaring oneself a dog. She arrived at her location, the food shop they often went to, the one that smelled of cooked wheat and the delicious fish and beef water she sometimes got out of Sakura's bowl. A few moments spent in stillness, focusing hers carefully, proved that she had arrived first, so she climbed carefully onto the roof above the closed eatery and curled up to wait. She was barely comfortable by the time she heard her contact come jogging up the road at a full trot. The fool passed the stand, not just once, but twice, looping around the block a few times as if confused, at one point even lifting his leg to urinate on the building below her. Kiri was a cat, and an intelligent cat, which is precisely why she chose that moment to jump on her contact's back. To his credit, Akamaru did not make a sound, even as he jumped and turned to bite at the thing that landed on him. He stopped when he saw Kiri sitting patiently behind him, as if she had nothing to do with what had happened, and bit off a growl. When their owners trained, they often trained with their companions at the same time, and in that time the two had found a wary peace between them. Akamaru knew that Kiri could not compare to his strength and endurance, but he also knew that she was smarter than he was, even though it burned him to admit it to himself. Having noticed the two getting along, Kiba and Sakura had figured out a basic code, a language the two could share to communicate with each other in them, as Kiri did not vocalize like a dog would. The code followed movements that both animals could make: scratches, sniffs, tail wags, anything they could do naturally could translate into a message, as long as they knew it was one, which was always signaled by 3 taps with a paw. Kiri tapped 3 times for attention, then began to scratch herself in a few specific places, her tail moving in long, languid arcs. The message was rough, with only basic verbs and nouns to work with, but it functioned well enough for their needs. Enter tomorrow. Wait for orange. Victory allies. Victory self. Tell you pack. Tell kunai white-eye green skin pack. Tell lazy fat pretty pack. Akamaru resisted the urge to bark, instead nodding to indicate he received the message. Kiri shook her head and patted Akamaru on the head with a paw before taking off. Sakura smiled to herself the next day, after the exam. Proctor, a creepy woman named Anko with purple hair and a loud personality, announced the contest. Each team would enter Training Ground 44, the Forest of Death, carrying 1 scroll saying either Heaven or Earth. Sakura assumed they would need both scrolls to pass. Piece of cake, she thought, scratching Kiri's head and glancing at Kiba, who nodded once, as if agreeing to something the examiner was saying, his eyes happening to pass by Sakura at the time. "You sure about this?" whispered Naruto, who was picking at the scratch on his face. The examiner had tossed the kunai at him when he continued his boastful antics from the previous day, carving a tiny cut into his cheek in doing so. She had leaned in to speak intimidating words at him, and Naruto had smirked, having just seen Sasuke palm something from his pocket when she moved in. "We all need scrolls, means we have fewer options to get them." Sasuke, on the other side of her, snorted, then leaned in himself. "Fewer options, much better odds, Naruto." Sasuke, for one, had stopped watching the proctor, and started watching the tall, thin person who had given Anko back her kunai, holding it in their foot-long tongue. Something fell off, as if the person's face was a mask, although he could clearly see the face moving properly when the person talked, and the voice was feminine even as the body shape and facial structure was clearly masculine. It was an unknown, and Sasuke was enough of a shinobi to dislike anything he could not readily recognize. Sakura nodded, her eyes casually passing over the other examinees. Ino refused to meet her gaze, but Shikamaru noticed her glance and raised one eyebrow and gave a slight nod. Her eyes kept moving, crossing over Lee, who struck a manly pose and gave her a thumbs up. Sakura frowned at him, then realized she had broken character, stopping her supposed casual glance around and starting at the green-clad genin. "If you break character, give observers a reason." She flinched away from Lee, clutching at Sasuke's arm. She felt him stiffen slightly at the contact, so she leaned in and whispered into his ear. "Sorry, Sasuke, explain later." He relaxed slightly in her grip, and nodded, not taking his eyes off the proctor. "The exam will last for 5 days. The proctor was saying, hands on hips, her smile carefree, as if discussing a holiday. "To pass, you must have 2 scrolls, one of each type. You must bring them to the tower. You must have a full team, a teammate who cannot recover will fail you. You are forbidden from opening the scrolls until you reach the tower." She grinned. "And boy, will it surprise you if you do open them, because the full rules for this challenge are in each scroll, even the secret rules." Schmuck bait, Sakura thought with a grin, and both Naruto and Sasuke snorted at the same moment. "Each of you will be given a consent form, waiving all liability for your possible maiming or death in this part of the exam. You have a half-hour to read the paper. At that time, you may turn in 3 signed waivers for one of the 2 scrolls, given at random." "Dismissed." "Oh, it's you, shiny forehead girl." "Hello, Ino," said Sakura, walking over to Ino's team. "I thought you had quit," said Ino, smirking. Sakura rolled her eyes and breezed right past the platinum blonde girl, raising a hand in greeting to Shikamaru and Choji. The chubby boy waved and offered a chip from the bag he had opened. Sakura took it gladly and ate it. The Akimichi family were all rather rotund by design, something to do with their clan jutsu, and they gained that weight by eating the best food in the village. Anyone who did not gain weight just by being in their presence could not be appreciating the food they made. Sakura frowned as she realized that Ino had not gained so much as an ounce of weight, even as Sakura's body had begun to tone up. Shikamaru smirked at her as she ate. "Never thought I'd see one of the fashionable kunoichi of our class eating snack food." "Things change, you lazy bastard," Sakura said casually, a smile on her face. Shikamaru did not deny the accusation. Everything about him spoke of his laze. His hair was pulled up into a knot, making his head look like a black pineapple, simply because it was the easiest way to care for it. His cloths were all dark-colored, nothing brighter than a washed-out gray, because it made them easier to wash. His lack of effort was famous amongst his former classmates, as was his intellect. Shikamaru was smart enough to become an incredible shinobi, if only he would be willing to make the effort. "You ready for the exam?" Sakura asked casually. Shikamaru nodded. "Should not take too long to find others, even in such a large area." "Yeah, maybe a half hour at most, if they are not moving too fast. Even Naruto could find someone in that time." Shikamaru nodded carefully, and Sakura gave them one last wave before wandering off to finish reading her forms, message given and received. Sasuke walked up to Lee, Tenten, and Neji. Lee looked at Tenten, who nodded to him, then turned to Sasuke. "I hope that this challenge goes well for you, Sasuke-san. I would greatly like to face you, should we meet." "I am sure we will," said Sasuke, passing by them without slowing. "I doubt it'll take more than a half hour. YOSH! I am already filled with the power of youth." Tenten rolled her eyes and clapped a hand over Lee's mouth. "Try not to get him wound up, Sasuke-kun," she said, her tone of voice horrified as Lee shook within her grasp. "This is going to be a long 5 days as it is." Sasuke paused and looked at Neji. The brown-haired boy stared back, feigning indifference. He looked tired. Ancient. Like a young man, pushed into an early old age by suffering, his face unwrinkled but his eyes tired from all they had seen. After a short pause, Neji gave a short, stiff nod. Maybe we will see each other, he said. With your eyes, I bet you'll see Naruto well before the rest of us. Neji nodded again, still stiff. Sasuke turned to go, then stopped himself. After a moment, he awkwardly gave Neji a pat on the shoulder, which was received without comment. He then walked away, thoughtful, while Neji continued to stare ahead, unmoved. Hey, Hinata! What are you doing here? Hinata started when he spoke, his face reddening a little. I just needed time to think. Naruto nodded cheerfully. Makes sense. Scary, right? Hinata nodded. It's a lot to consider. It will be dangerous. Naruto laughed, and Hinata turned away for a moment, worried she'd said something embarrassing, that he was laughing at her. It'll be dangerous for them, Naruto said, smiling. I bet most of them have never fought a Hyuga before. Give them an extra tap for me when they do. Hinata smiled at him, her face glowing slightly with the strength of her blush. Hey, I don't know how to say this, said Naruto, scratching the back of his head. Hinata froze. I mean, Sakura told me what to say when this happened, but I'm no good at this sort of thing. Her face turned a deeper shade of red, her eyes wide, her heart beating fast in her chest. Anyhow, I need to know. Yes, she whispered, barely daring to breath. Did you guys get the message last night? Hinata sighed and dropped her head. Yes, Naruto-kun. Good. Sakura says half an hour. I'll find you. He started to walk away, and Hinata turned to hide her dismay, but she turned back to him when he called to her. Hey, we probably won't fight in there, but if we do, don't hold back, okay? He turned and gave her a big smile. I already know you'll kick some ass, but I'll know if you hold back if we end up fighting. So let's both go all out, if it happens. And anyone else, beat the hell out of them. He held his arm out, thumb up, and grinned at her over his shoulder. He stood there, back to her, his two swords crossed over his shoulders. A cool breeze kicked up, making the trees sway slightly and his hair ruffle. She looked at him, eyes shining, and took his encouragement to heart. I'll prove myself in this exam, and then he'll see me. It's worth fighting for, right? Yes, she said, and her smile was genuine. Naruto walked away, slightly weirded out. Every time he talked to Hinata-chan, she got all red and started stuttering. He knew she did the same thing with everyone else, but it was much worse with him. He sniffed at his jumpsuit, curious if she was allergic to his detergent, then shrugged. He still had his consent form to read. The moment they entered the forest and lost view of their entry gate, Sasuke called for a pause. He dug into his hip pouch, pulled out the heaven scroll he'd taken, then tossing it casually to Naruto. Naruto caught it and looked at Sasuke, confused. You're more likely to escape if we're cornered, Sasuke said with a shrug. And I took it from the proctor. If they were spying on us when we did it. Sasuke had resisted the urge to laugh when he got the scroll. They had come from a test that forced them to cheat the previous day, then had them claim their scrolls with no more security than a sheet across a wooden booth? Ludicrous. Naruto nodded and stuffed the scroll in his own belt pouch, then stretched. The plan is still on, right? When Sakura and Sasuke both nodded, Naruto scratched a circle into the dirt around him, then put his hands together and began summoning clones, in batches of 5. Each clone would pause, make a mark on the dirt aiming in a specific direction, and then take off in that direction. Naruto did not bother to count how many clones he made in total, but he did not stop until the circle had so many lines coming from it that it simply looked like churned dirt. When he was done, he sat in the circle and waited while Sakura and Sasuke got into position to ambush any attackers, just in case someone thought to venture this close to the starting gates. After a few minutes, Naruto began to speak up, pointing in a direction and saying what they had found and how far away. Sasuke wrote down the information in code while Sakura and Kiri kept watch, their fine-tuned sense of hearing making them the best choice in the cover-rich environment. That way, 500 meters, team from Konoha, not one of our contacts, moving away, did not see me. That way, 430 meters, team from Suna, not the creepy guy with the sand, moving away, did not see me. He smiled, then pointed almost at the fence to his right. That way, 250 meters, Shikamaru's team, approaching, contact made. Within a half hour, all 12 of them had gathered, each shinobi watching the forest carefully for threats, even as they discussed the situation. Sakura had also copied out information on another 12 teams, and was sorting through them trying to find likely targets, Kiri perched on her shoulders and acting as her scout. Neji walked up to her, waiting patiently for her to acknowledge him, then said without preamble, "Can Naruto give details on each of these teams?" Visual details? Sakura nodded, and he flashed a small, self-satisfied smile. Then I can identify who has what scrolls. Security was a joke in the booth where they issued them. Sakura smiled back, and waved Naruto over to start dealing with the list. So we're really doing this, said Kiba from one side of the temporary meeting ground. We're gonna team up and hunt down the scrolls as a pack? Sakura nodded, reaching up to pet her companion. We might be fine alone, but as a group, we hold all the advantages of our members, plus sheer numbers. We'll rest during the day, with one group dedicated to defense, and each evening, Naruto will send out a search party to find us a target, or two if we can handle it. Show up as a group, take them down, retreat to base. Shikamaru grunted from where he lay, staring at the sun through the trees. Faced with 12 of us, almost every team will probably capitulate immediately. Those that do not will either be too dangerous to face in smaller teams, or too arrogant to yield. Either way, we're in the best position. He sat up and rubbed his neck, a little sheepishly. But there is one troublesome thing. We need to henge Naruto when we go after folks. Like hell, said Ino, huffing. I'm not giving him all of the credit for our effort. Sasuke shook his head, and his eyes went cold. Stop being a child, Ino. Only Nuke Nin and dead shinobi want credit for their work, one for more work, and one to tell others how they got themselves killed. Ino flinched at his cold tone, and Sakura spoke up in that moment of quiet. It's not credit, it's tactics. Naruto will be throwing out a lot of clones when we fight. If we're changed to look like him, it'll be immediate camouflage. When we fight, we'll be using our own abilities, but the foe will not be able to identify which attack can do what. And should the worst happen, his clones can cover for us while we escape. Naruto looked up where he was sitting, his eyes sharp and his jaw jutting out. It also means that if any of them get ideas about coming after us to get their scroll back, they'll go for me first. He reached into his pouch and pulled out their scroll, tossing it to Sakura. That way, if I have none, they can't steal them back, and they'll spend a lot of effort and chakra trying to get to me before they figure it out. Ino stomped her foot and glowered at every person in the clearing. I am not fighting as Naruto, and you can't make me. Shikamaru shrugged and laid back down in the grass. You can be on guard duty then. Only if Sasuke-kun guards with me. Sasuke opened his mouth to shout a rejection, then stopped with a sigh. He did not want to send this team out into the wilds on their own. He highly suspected that they'd get a scroll, but lose after the fact due to Ino becoming incapacitated, if not dead. He bit his lip until it bled, then grunted a sharp agreement to the two of them on guard. Sakura reached out and rested a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, she whispered to him, almost inaudible, with how much Ino was shouting in glee over her assignment. The whole team knew how badly Sasuke wanted to run loose during this exam, picking up as much technique with his Sharingan as he could. He had just sacrificed his own goal for the safety of someone who he cared little for, and they knew it. And in the forest, someone else smiled from their place under the dirt and quietly said to themselves, Yes, thank you, Sasuke-kun. Chapter 22, Viper in the Forest. Orochimaru appears. The combined Konohagakure group moved further into the forest once their course of action was chosen, searching carefully until they found a cave large enough for the group to rest within and screened slightly by the surrounding forest. They settled down to wait, and it only took a few comments from Sasuke to get Ino to stop talking. It's to stay safe, Ino-san, said Hinata, who had noticed the other girl fuming after being told to shut up by her crush in no uncertain terms. Neijo Naizen and I are both watching. She stopped under the sudden pressure of her cousin's attention. Don't call me that, he said from where he was sitting, his back to the rest of them, his voice chill. Everyone turned to look at him, and he stood and turned to glare at Hinata, his eyes narrow, his jaw clenched tight. Not even in jest. I am not your brother. We are not family in any manner, regardless of our shared name and relatives. I would not be so weak. He turned to Ino, and his jaw loosened a little even as his eyes narrowed further. We must be quiet because this place is safe, but only for a given value of safe. Giving us away by loudly claiming what an excellent pair you are with a real shinobi has so much irony in it, it goes beyond the humorous and into the horrifying. So shut up. He turned and sat again, putting them out of mind and returning his attention to the forest around them. Rock Lee opened his mouth to chastise Neji for his lack of manners, then shut it. Hinata-san did not look shocked, or even angry. She just looked sad, staring at her family member with eyes that shone with unshed tears. He clenched his fists, the fires of youth burning in his heart, and swore that the next time they fought, he would show the Hyuga the proper way to speak to those below your own strength, with the respect due to a worthy foe. The rest of the day was spent in uncomfortable silence, with everyone but Sasuke and Ino catching naps to get ready for the night's work ahead. Occasionally, Ino would get up and sit next to Sasuke, and each time, Sasuke would get up and move to the other side of the entrance. Eventually, she gave up and settled down against the cave wall to watch the forest outside, or rather, to face the forest while watching Sasuke. After some time, she was shaken from her boredom when Sasuke sat down next to her. He sat with his knees raised high, elbows resting on them, and his hands folded before his face. She turned to him, eyes glittering, her mind conjuring a moment of bliss as their lips touched, here in the dangerous forest of death, only for that image to be shattered by the cold look he gave her. There was scorn in his gaze, disdain, and just barely visible behind them, she saw a moment of compassion, and that made his words all the more terrible. He spoke quietly, barely a whisper, conscious of his sleeping allies nearby. He spoke of the dangers of being a shinobi, and how she had no appreciation of them. He spoke of the responsibility she had for her team and allies, who she regularly dismissed or antagonized. He spoke of her inappropriate desire for attention, of her lack of physical strength, of her completely unsuitable manner and bearing for any duty in the service of Konohagakure. And the entire time, his eyes shone with that same mix of haughty disdain and terrible, cruel compassion. "I understand your weakness," his mesmerizing eyes said in their own little language. "That does not make it forgivable." It was all the worse because he, and only he, could really claim the right to judge her on that. If Sasuke Uchiha, the pinnacle of shinobi manhood, would judge her unworthy, how could any lesser shinobi say otherwise? When night finally fell, the others gathered and set off into the woods while the two of them chose shifts to rest. Ino did not say a word to the others, but simply made her way to a corner of the cave and laid down on her side. She refused to talk to stupid Sakura, who was getting all manly and strong, or that idiot Naruto they always hung around with, or that jerk Sasuke who would not acknowledge her. None of them deserved her, so she was sure to deny them her presence as much as she could. As she slowly drifted to sleep, she passed the time telling herself that in a few days this would be done, and she'd have nothing to do with them again. Sakura shot a curious glance at Sasuke, who rolled his eyes and mimed wiping a tear from his face dramatically. She sighed at that and shook her head quietly. It was probably for the best that someone like Ino would not be on the assault team. Naruto raised his hand, silently signaling the rest of the Konoha team. He pulled out a pad of paper and quickly wrote down what his clone had passed on to him, then handed it off to Shikamaru, who was working as the leader of the group. He, Choji, and Shino then nodded to the rest and took off in another direction. They had discussed it earlier, and with the entire group seeking out only one target for the night, Shikamaru had suggested that Naruto lead Shino around the forest, marking the other teams with the bugs from his internal hive, permitting him to track their prey without Naruto having to stay up all day spamming clones. Naruto, his eyes slightly heavy, had been quite happy with the idea of doing some light recon and then getting some sleep. He hated to send Choji away, but it was the optimal choice. Shikamaru glanced at the note and nodded to himself, then waved the others close. "We have a single team, 500 meters ahead. 3 males, white suits, Amegakure headbands, rebreathers. All 3 are awake and aware." He thought for a moment, then nodded to himself. "Here's the plan." Oboro looked up from the small fire his team had lit when the orange-clad boy stepped into the firelight. "Oh," he said, his voice muffled by his rebreather. "It seems we have a guest." Mubi and Kagari, his teammates, stood up and drew kunai, but Oboro waved them off while he stood as well. "Let's hear what the little boy has to say, before we decide to kill him." He bowed to the orange boy and waited. "I want to give you a chance to yield," said the orange boy. Oboro shared a look with his team, then started to chuckle. "It's 3-on-1, little boy, or do you have some friends coming to the party?" His eyes glinted in the firelight, and his hand casually drifted to his belt pouch. In the dark shadows of the nearby undergrowth, Shikamaru crouched and started watching the plan unfold. Step 1. The leader prepares to attack. The boy's 2 teammates dashed out of the woods behind them, both hinged to look like him. They ran oddly, scrabbling on all fours like animals, moving deceptively fast. Even as Mubi and Kagari spun and threw their blades, the 2 were on them. The orange team lunged low to the ground, lower than most opponents would get, leaving their backs exposed. They slapped at Mubi and Kagari's legs, setting them off balance even as the 2 of them drew new weapons. Step 2. The second and third become unbalanced, the leader distracted. Oboro turned and raised his own hand, a pair of kunai ready to fly, when he felt a presence approaching from the original's direction. He continued his turn into a spin, arms still raised, then froze in place. He saw a green blur lurch from behind the first contact, which suddenly resolved into a field of green covering his vision, the green fabric of a cloth-covered knee just before it struck him in the face with enough force to break his nose. He fell back, his mind and body barely functional as he clung to awareness. Step 3. Leader down, second and third distracted. Mubi and Kagari saw their leader drop from the corner of their eyes and jumped back slightly, preparing to throw their blades at the strange green-clad boy who had just put down Oboro and was now standing calmly, one arm back behind his waist, his other hand raised in a defensive pose. And what was he wearing? He had some ridiculous pair of fake glasses with a big plastic nose and mustache attached. Why would they wear something like that in a fight? They never even saw the other two orange blurs approaching from the sides. The two orange boys struck at the same time, a series of delicate taps, on the arms, the legs, the chest. Their arms moving in a blur, almost in sync with one another. Shikamaru grinned in the darkness. Those delicate taps were Juken strikes, direct blows to the opponent's chakra systems, each blow followed through by a slight output of the striker's own chakra to close off that pathway. There was no blocking that sort of move, and neither of the remaining foes had enough time to figure that out before they dropped. The forest paused for a section, silent save for the snap and pop of the fire. After that moment, seeing all three opponents down, the original boy stomped his foot and dropped the henge, revealing an angry-looking Tenten. "I didn't get to do anything," she said morosely, gesturing to her still untouched scroll. Shikamaru stepped out, shaking his head. "That was the plan, Tenten. You only had to defend yourself, and only if one of the others failed. What wasn't in the plan was Lee standing in the open. You were supposed to hide after you took down the leader, Lee." "I am not Rock Lee," said the green-clad genin loudly. "They would never recognize me through this disguise, bought for me by my own Gai-sensei years ago. Now I am Rock Lee, mysterious ninja." He paid no mind to the stares he was getting from the rest of the group when he reached up to adjust the fake nose. His mind was too busy admiring his new disguise. "I knew someday I would use them, Gai-sensei." In his mind, he could almost hear his teacher's response. Truly, it is the gift of the springtime of youth, to retain such a thing for years until it is needed. Only the most strong and passionate youth could show such patience. "Gai-sensei." "Lee." Tenten sighed as she watched Lee think, his eyes sparkling. She knew that look. Any moment now, Lee would be imagining a sunset. "Hey," she said, leaning toward Shikamaru with a big grin on her face. "You said you wanted a distraction? I think we can check that part off." Shikamaru sighed. "I'll turn down any promotion I get offered. This is too troublesome." As they went through the fallen shinobi's goods, Neji looked over at Hinata. "I admit I was surprised to see you keeping up with my strikes, Hinata. You are not as weak as I thought you were." "Thank you, Neji-o. Neji-san." Hinata blushed quietly at her slip, but she remained focused on their surroundings, using the 360-degree vision of her eyes to scan for additional foes. Neji grunted to himself, and gave her another point in his head for being suitably focused for a shinobi. "We are not family, or friends, or even real allies," he said coldly. "But know this, I at least will not underestimate you now." Hinata turned her head and nodded to Neji, even as her eyes kept moving. Unbeknown by him, he had just given her the highest compliment she had ever received from a family member since her mother died, and even if he was cold about it, she would not forget. Sasuke woke with a start, his eyes darting around. The cave was silent, the fire reduced to mere embers. Outside, he could see only vague shapes of the forest in the meager moonlight that filtered through the trees. He sat up, uncertain why he was awake and unable to sense Ino, who should have been on guard. "Hello, Sasuke-kun." Sasuke was already moving to one side, rolling in the dirt, just inches ahead of the kunai that hit where he had lay. As he completed his roll, his arms swept out, throwing his own kunai at the darkness in the back of the cave, following the trajectory of the attack he had dodged. His eyes turned red, and he watched as the blade flashed out and stopped in mid-air, hovering as if caught in a shadow. Then the shadow moved, and Sasuke realized it had indeed been caught. "Hardly a kind way to greet a friend, Sasuke-kun. One might say you were unhappy at my arrival." The strange man with the feminine voice he had been watching during the introduction to the forest stepped out of the deeper darkness of the cave, casually twirling the kunai he had caught. "It's possible you don't even want the gift I brought for you." Sasuke tucked into a forward roll as the man tossed his kunai back at him, the weapon whistling through the air with the force of the throw. He dipped his hand into his right pocket and leaped forward, engaging the stranger in melee. This turned out to be a grievous error. The man was strong and fast, dodging Sasuke's blows with an air of indifference. "Let's see how indifferent you feel now," thought Sasuke. He jumped high and spun his body, hanging upside down for a moment when the man blocked his kick, and in that moment, his hand shot out, a cloud of glittering dirt flying into the man's face. Sasuke smirked to himself, but that smirk faded when the man grabbed his still extended arm and threw him into the wall at the rear of the cave. Sasuke hit hard enough that his back creaked dangerously, and he barely managed to control his fall to the dirt. The man tisked, walking forward slightly as Sasuke pulled himself up. An excellent throw, Sasuke-kun. But your toys will not be enough to stop me. He raised his hand, a tiny flame glowing on his palm, and in that flickering light Sasuke could see that the man's eyes were unchanged and undamaged. I know I hit him, I saw his eyes open. There must be a trick to it, some sort of shield or something. He casually tossed another handful at the man from his right pocket, and again, he made no effort to dodge or block it. He dipped his hand into his left pocket, and threw another handful at the man. The man sighed as the dust splashed on his face, running down his body. If that's all you have, Sasuke-kun, then my time here is waste. He stopped, his jaw closing, his throat bulging and straining. His face took on a grin of pained amusement, and after a moment, he managed to push out a few words. Contact. Poison. Sasuke gave the man a satisfied smirk, shaking his left hand slightly. Even with all of his training and effort to build up an immunity, the paralytic poison in the left pocket was enough to numb his hand completely. Someone like this stranger would be frozen, immobile, for hours, assuming the poison did not overcome them and paralyze their heart of lungs to make them immobile in a more permanent sense. He raised his hand and carefully, slowly made the signs for his plasma lance, his mind already accepting that this was the time and place, his first kill, and a part of him was revolted, while another part rejoiced that his first would not be his brother. Want to give me your name, before I slay you? Otherwise, I think you're about to become just another dead genin. The man smiled, and Sasuke felt a sting on his ankle. He glanced down and saw the serpent coiled at his feet, its fangs still in his leg. By the time his eyes flashed back up, he saw the man moving again, calmly, gracefully. My name is Orochimaru, Sasuke-kun. And I know much about poison. He reached out and tapped Sasuke on the chest, softly knocking the boy over, the snake's venom doing its work already. I have a use for you, Sasuke-kun, a wonderful use. And that use is also a gift. Sasuke grunted, his jaw clenching, and managed a single word. Ino, he said. The man laughed. She was showing such an immense interest in the moon-blossoming flowers she found outside that she could not bring herself to leave them. I let my own team go play with her. She is unharmed, for now. We'll see how she is when they are done. Sasuke raged against his own body, trying desperately to move. He struggled for Ino. He struggled for his own safety. He struggled for his revenge. But the poison held him in its immutable grasp, holding him in the dirt like a child. Eventually, the man leaned down and pulled Sasuke up, into a slouched sitting position. You've made quite an impression, Sasuke-kun. I have been watching you for years, and even under the kind and gentle guidance of Kakashi-san, you still managed to keep your killing edge. I wonder why. Could it be so that you'd have it when the time comes to kill your brother? Sasuke's eyes twitched slightly, and Orochimaru smiled. I know all about the purge, Sasuke-kun. I can only imagine how that makes you feel. How badly you want revenge. He leaned and whispered in the boy's ear. I can help you get that revenge. All you need to is accept my gift, Sasuke-kun. Sasuke managed to twitch his eyes and shoot a baleful glare at the man. You wonder why I would give you this gift? It's simple, Sasuke-kun. Unlike your brother, I want you to live. I see potential in you, Sasuke-kun. And to maximize your potential. He opened his mouth, revealing the fangs of a serpent, and his face suddenly lunged, his neck extending in a vivid and unreal manner. He bit Sasuke hard on the shoulder, and the boy's veins filled with molten fire. The man chuckled as Sasuke's vision started to fade, and the last thing he heard was the man's mocking laughter. Struggle, Uchiha, struggle and live, as only I want you to. Chapter 23 Moonflower? Ino's in danger. Shino, Naruto, and Choji walked through the forest with care. Neither Naruto nor Choji were inclined to use stealth, and in Choji's case, he had little talent for it, but all three of them were very careful to move as quietly as possible away from the clearing they had just passed, and the thing they had witnessed. Shino paused for a moment, then raised an hand and signaled the others close. They're moving away from us. Naruto blew out a sigh. So far, their mission to mark their potential victims had gone well. They had several promising candidates, and Naruto had sent out a few clones to try and find the scroll capture team and inform them where some easy targets were, a set of genin that had just had a tough fight and were weak enough that any one of his allies might have taken the team, never mind the force they had at this time. One of those clones had popped and reported success, and the assault team was moving in. But in the process of seeking out targets, they had almost become one of them. The three of them had almost blundered into a clearing, and had backed off carefully when Naruto waved them back. 3 younger shinobi from Sunagake were facing off against 3 genin from Amegakure. This meant nothing to Choji or Shino, but Naruto recognized the Suna genin and was concerned enough to pull the team back, leaving a clone to watch. I ran across these 3 when the Chunin exams were warming up, he explained in the forest. The girl and the guy in black with face paint were normal, if arrogant. The guy was being a bullying jerk, picked a fight with a kid I know. My team was about to fight with them when the third one with the red hair, Gaara, showed up and threatened to murder his team if they did not stop causing a fuss. And the way they reacted, he said with a frown, I think he might have been willing and able to do it. Shino adjusted his glasses slightly. That does not mean he would win against us, Naruto-san. He might have a specific power over the other 2. Or he might have legal power over them. That said, your choice is a good one. Why? Because it is better to know their capabilities if they intend to display them by fighting, and we can always claim them for ourselves if they are weakened. Naruto and Choji nodded agreeably, then Naruto stiffened. Scratch that. We're leaving. Now. Quickly. He suited actions to words, leaping away into the woods as fast as he could. When the others caught up, Naruto quickly summoned a trio of clones, who henged into the team and took off to the side while the 3 of them hid. It was a tense half-hour as they made their way slowly along until Shino informed them that the Suna genin were moving away. Wait, said Choji, who was frowning. How do you know they are leaving, Shino? Shino nodded once and held out his hand. After a moment a few insects, smaller than his smallest fingernail, crawled onto his hand. These are female Kikaichu insects. The males within my colony can detect their scent from great distances, and scouts from the colony can track them and report their location. You bugged the red-haired kid, said Naruto, incredulous. Shino shook his head slightly. No. I attempted to, but he managed to kill it without giving it time to send out an alarm pheromone. The other 2 Suna shinobi are marked as of 10 seconds ago, when I got the latest report from a scout. Still heading away from us. The 3 Ame shinobi are reported as showing no signs of life. What happened, Naruto-san? Naruto shuddered as he replayed the memories his clone had given him in his mind. Gaara killed them. Their leader started a fight, and the kid slaughtered him by crushing him in sand. The other 2 surrendered their scroll, and he killed them too, as they begged for mercy. Then he spotted my clone and killed it as well. He shook his head, trying to keep the clone's painful death in a crushing grasp of sand out of mind. We need to tell the others to avoid him. Let's head back. Choji was the first to notice the strange glow through the trees only a few hundred feet from their base. It was a light blue color, and seemed to fill the air itself, turning everything they could see into a shade of blue. The 3 of them crept carefully through the woods, working towards the glow, and with each step they grew more apprehensive, because each step took them closer to both the source of the blue-tinted light and their base of operations. Eventually they reached a clearing and they saw what was causing the blue glow. Ino was kneeling on the grass in the clearing, staring at a single blue flower no larger than her fist. Her eyes were half-lidded, her face slack and serene. This was all the more worrisome, because 2 shinobi were standing next to her, 1 on each side, crouching within arm's reach. Both had a single arm up, 2 kunai held in one hand. They were as still as Ino, unmoving, but while she gazed languidly at the flower, they gazed at her with the unblinking focus of an animal on the hunt. Naruto had barely begun to reach for his swords when the 2 shinobi turned to face him and his hidden teammates. They both gave him a small and mirthless smile before returning their gaze to Ino. I am Mamushi, said the one on the left, still unmoving. I wait patiently for my prey to come to me. If she moves, I strike. His attire was simple, a basic shinobi outfit, but instead of a dark black or blue color, his outfit had a brown coloration interspersed with occasional vertical stripes in a pale yellow tone. His head and face were covered with a mask of the same material, his eyes by dark lenses. I am Habu, said the one on the right, also unmoving. His outfit was much the same as Mamushi's, save that the yellow-toned sections were circular, encompassing large patches of the darker material. I seek out my prey and visit them with death. If she does not move, I strike. After a moment, Naruto stepped out, swords drawn. So, one way or another you intend to kill her? Both nodded at once, a single slow movement of the entire head. And if I have a spare scroll to give you, would you be satisfied and leave her alone? Both shook their heads, in the same slow, precise manner. Is there anything I can do, just short of killing you, that will stop you from hurting her? Both shinobi slowly shook their head, and Habu turned his face to Naruto once more. It is on you to determine which is best. Mamushi will give her the smallest of pricks, barely enough to feel, and she will die quickly and painlessly from his strike. Mamushi turned as well. Habu will strike ferociously. It will be painful, and undoubtedly lethal, but she will have the delusion of fighting her fate, and perhaps gain comfort from that notion. It is on you to choose, as our leader demands. Choose now or have the choice taken from you. Both leaned forward slightly, preparing to strike, their arms raising. 4 short swords flew out of the bushes to either side of Naruto, pinwheeling at the 2 foes. Only 2 people throw a weapon as unbalanced as a sword, either an idiot or very competent and practiced shinobi. Habu and Mamushi spun away, just far enough to avoid the spinning swords, and they both hissed in fury when they realized that the swords were literally pinwheeling, spinning on all of their axes, barely a threat. They continued their spin, arms flashing at the entranced Kanochi, only for Naruto to block both swings with his own blades, carefully placed a slice between their 2 kunai and into their hands if they pushed the attack. They pulled their hands back and struck again at different angles, both still trying to strike Ino, and both failing as she was dragged away by several Naruto clones who passed her along as if she was part of a bucket chain. Naruto spun, his swords flashing in an elaborate pattern, and broke away from the 2 enemies, who stood straight and watched him with an eerie silence. They shared a look between them, and Habu chose to speak. You have no real talent with swords, do you, Naruto-san? That was a very flashy move there, but it was also very poorly executed. Naruto laughed. Believe it if you want, but I know more about swords than, wait. Naruto looked at the 2 of them, who were unmoving, their arms not even raised to defend themselves. How the hell do you know my name? We know plenty about you, Naruto-san, said Habu, stepping away from his companion, spreading out a little to prepare to fight. We observed you carefully during the previous phase, as well as using the intelligence data our leader gave us. We are not here for the little Kanochi, we are here for you, to test your mettle. He raised his arm, his body held sideways to present a slimmer profile. There is only one way for this to end, Naruto-san. He swung his arm from where he was, 10 feet away, but something about his move made Naruto nervous, and the blonde jumped to the right, barely avoiding the strange blur that was coming at him so suddenly. He still managed to keep an eye on Habu, and he rolled away to his left as the blur lashed out again. This time, he observed Habu's arm elongating unnaturally, stretching out in a fluid manner. Habu swung that arm like a whip, and when the 2 kunai in his hand hit the ground, they were buried to the hilt. Mamushi meanwhile stood back from the 2 fighting shinobi, his stance easy and relaxed. He watched the fight patiently and with a great deal of interest. Naruto rolled again to the left to avoid another stroke, this time coming to his feet at the end of the roll, smiling at his good fortune. Something so simple as an extending arm was no challenge at all. He lowered his arms and waited for the next stroke, a long sideways lash. He laughed in triumph and brought his swords together, lunging for the extended limb, ready to draw the blades across one another like a giant pair of scissors. He managed to reach the arm, but when he tried to go for the cut, he was unable to move his swords. He looked down and saw that Habu had reached out with his other hand and had grabbed both handles, his fingers contorting like his arms to wrap around both of the hilts, and keep them still. "Gah, that's creepy!" he shouted, flinging his arms up violently, tossing his swords far over Habu's head to land on the forest floor behind him. Naruto opened his mouth to shout, then shut it quickly while tumbling to the right again to avoid another strike. He tumbled along in the same direction, avoiding each strike as it came, smiling to himself and making certain to periodically steal a quick, almost unnoticeable glance at his dropped swords. Almost unnoticeable. Mamushi crouched in the forest and circled slowly through the ground cover, circling around the fight. His clone, a basic technique that was incapable of fighting or even interacting with the world around it, was doing a good job of remaining visible and drawing attention to itself with its nonchalance, the perfect cover for him to slip away and hunt for Naruto's teammates. He passed carefully through the bush, brushing the leaves back slowly and carefully with his arms, making no noise as he searched. In short order, he saw the 2 of them, the short fat kid and the taller, skinny kid who was wearing sunglasses even in the dark of the night. He pulled out a kunai and pulled his arm back to throw it, but the skinny kid turned and looked directly at him, in spite of his concealment. "You have already lost, Mamushi-san," the kid said quietly, with a degree of cold certainty one usually got from teachers reading from science textbooks, of indisputable fact made real by the very laws of nature. Mamushi smirked slightly under his mask and stepped forward out of cover. "You think little of me, young one," he said, activating his killing intent and sending it out at the 2. The killing intent technique was simple, so much so that it required little chakra and no hand seals. All it did was push the little part in every creature's brain that whispered in their ears when danger was near and told them to flee or die. Mamushi, like most Otogekyo shinobi, was well accustomed to its use, and was quite skilled with it. He smiled to himself when the fat kid flinched and turned pale, then he frowned. The skinny kid did not flinch. He simply stood there, staring at Mamushi, his expressions covered by the collar of his coat. Yes, the kid admitted, turning his body slightly to fully face Mamushi, his arms still in his pockets. I think little of you. Why? Because for all your obvious experience and skill in fear and stealth, you failed the most important skill, that of observation. He raised one arm, holding it out, and Mamushi watched with mild interest as a tiny bug crawled out of his sleeve and stood on his fingertip, waving a pair of feelers around. As soon as we spotted you, I sent out my friends to cover the area and watch for foes who sought to use stealth against us. They noticed you when you passed through that bush, and I ordered them to act accordingly. Mamushi shuddered in sudden fear, because nothing invokes existential dread in a shinobi like realizing that they had walked into a trap without noticing. He raised his arm to throw his kunai, then froze, partially with the sudden sensation of exhaustion that simple act caused in him, but also in surprise at the large number of insects he could see crawling on his arm. Each one was the size of his smallest fingernail, beetle-shaped with a thin and dull black shell. I never even felt them, he thought to himself as he stumbled and fell to the ground, his body exhausted as his chakra was consumed by the swarm. Be ready to assist Naruto, Shino said to Choji while his friends fed on the fallen shinobi's chakra. You'll know when. Choji tore his gaze away from Mamushi with a quick jerk of his head, looking at Shino, his eyes still wide with fear. After a moment though, his eyes narrowed, and he nodded and gave a small grunt of agreement, very quietly. Shino did not smile in victory. He did not celebrate, inside or out. He watched carefully, and when Mamushi stopped moving, he recalled his swarm, content to disable his foe instead of slaying them. Death is easy given and impossible to take back, his father had said when Shino received his first hive. Shino had the respect of life held by those who knew how dangerous a weapon they carried, and felt no need to act rashly. But Shino was a very thoughtful and serious young man, so he left a few of his swarm on the man, just in case. Naruto rolled to his right one last time, and saw that he was in position. Finally, his swords one more roll away. Habu was excellent in his technique, lashing out with surprising speed and ferocity, often without any sort of tell on his moves. He simply went from stationary and still to all-out attack, a sudden flash of movement without warning. Naruto avoided the attacks only for two reasons. The first was that he had no real taijutsu style, something Guy had worked hard to encourage. He had learned from Guy not how to fight and stylize movements, but how those movements worked, and from there, how to use the same principles for any move. He had some tells, but far less than that of a shinobi with a specific style of combat like Hinata. He also fought against himself frequently, and was well used to opponents who were unpredictable. The second reason he was alive was his clones. He had made several before leaving the bushes, and they waited for him to need help, quickly using the body replacement technique to swap with the real Naruto before a surprise blow would hit. It was uncomfortable, being tossed around the battlefield by his clones, but each time, he gained the knowledge of the strike that hit him, and he would charge back into the clearing, always careful to head to the right, towards his fallen swords. Finally on place, he smirked at Habu and then dove for the swords. His hand grabbed one of the hilts just in time for Habu's hand to wrap around his own. You cannot think I did not notice your moves, your careful glances, as you tried to get back to your swords, Naruto-san. Naruto smiled and used his other hand to grab Habu's wrist. Habu frowned and sent his other arm out, kunai ready. Naruto dropped his sword and caught the incoming hand, stepping into the attack to give himself enough time to catch the wrist instead of the blade. He then rotated both of his arms at the elbow, wrapping Habu's flexible arms around his own, and grinned. Did you notice that Mamushi is missing? He asked innocently. Habu opened his mouth to taunt his foe, but the sky suddenly darkened. He looked up to see a spinning ball of green and brown briefly eclipse the moon before falling upon him with crushing force. Choji's human bullet technique was a thing to behold. His body, blown up to many times its original size and mass from his clan's techniques, and spinning at more than 10 revolutions per second, made for a great deal of force applied to a relatively small area. In this case, that area started with Habu's face. Habu's body was smashed into the earth, and as the spinning continued, he was ground into the dirt and then flung away, sailing dozens of feet until he hit a tree, his arms slowly coiling around him as they, too, were drawn under Choji's bulk. Choji only stopped when Habu's hands released Naruto and slipped under his rolling body. Yada! Naruto ran up and gave Choji a high five. That was perfect! He shouted, dancing in a small circle. I knew you'd spot the opening when I dove for the swords. Shino joined them, Mamushi over his shoulder, and the three of them advanced to check on the fallen Habu, who was starting to stir. Wait, Habu said, waving his hand as his arms slowly reverted to normal, causing him to grimace. His body and clothes looked like they had been put through a thresher, blood and broken bones quite evident, all the more so when his arm was back to normal size and yet still bent oddly. He used the better of his arms to reach into the tattered remains of his clothing and pulled out a heaven scroll, rolling it onto the dirt halfway to the team, who all stepped back cautiously. "You have won, and my mission is complete," Habu said, grimacing as he stood. "I was to test you, and it is done. I cannot fight further with any sort of effectiveness. Please let me collect my teammate and go." Shino frowned. "You are not here to become a Chunin," he stated flatly. Habu shook his head gingerly, as if he was worried that his neck was damaged. "We were here to get an idea on how Naruto-san and Sasuke-san fought, and no other reason. We have tested Sasuke already. You will find him in your cave. Your female teammate was bait, nothing more." Choji glanced back at Ino, who had wandered back to the blue flower and was once again kneeling in front of it. "Smash the flower," said Habu, "and she will return to her senses. The Moonflower Trap is a genin-level test in Oto, and will not harm her or anyone else." He saw the look on Naruto's face. "I will crush it for you, if you do not trust my words." Naruto shook his head and sent a clone to help Ino before turning to the others. Choji shrugged and pulled out a bag of chips, content to leave the decision to Naruto. Shino looked at Habu and Mamushi, then said, "I am content to leave the decision to you, Naruto. I am not inclined to kill these two." "Why?" "Because we have won, and should they consider attack again in the future, the odds would be even better for us, making them a non-threat." Naruto nodded, and turned to Habu. "Take your friend and go, and we'll call it even." His face slowly stretched into a big smile. "And when you get home, tell them Uzumaki Naruto is a badass, but a fair badass. That was a good fight." Choji and Shino's eyebrows rose, and neither spoke up, but they thought the same thing. So now we're nothing but sidekicks. They would have argued, but Naruto's clone crushed the flower, and Ino started to scream. The rest of the Konoha group returned to the cave to find a comatose Sasuke, a crying Ino, and one less scroll to retrieve. "You need to quit." Naruto looked up from where Sasuke lay and stared at Shikamaru. "You need to quit, Naruto. Sasuke is in a lot of pain. He might be dying." "Like hell we will," said Naruto, slowly standing up, fists clenched. "I'm not a quitter. None of us are. If we're going to lose, we'll go down swinging." His entire body was taut, like a violin ready to be played, and the melody was not one that Shikamaru wanted to hear. Naruto looked ready to explode, and the way he kept glancing to the back of the cave where Ino lay, Shikamaru could easily guess who would be the first target if Naruto broke. Sakura laid a hand on her teammate's shoulder. Her eyes were rimmed in red from her tears, her face sallow and tired, but then, she had every right to be tired. It had been nearly a day since the strange man had bit Sasuke, and she had yet to sleep. Kiri was not with her. The cat had curled up at Sasuke's side and refused to leave him. "Naruto," she said, "we need to keep him safe." He reached out and brushed her hand off his shoulder, his face set. "And how will he feel when we tell them we lost because of them? Will Sasuke be happy we quit for his sake?" Sakura flinched slightly and looked away. "Fuck that," came the quiet mumble from the ground. Sakura and Naruto crouched and saw Sasuke was awake, although his eyes were clenched shut. The others crowded around, interested in what was happening, all but one. "Do you need anything?" asked Sakura, resisting the urge to hug Sasuke as tight as she could and never let go. His eyes flashed open for a moment, and she saw that his Sharingan was active, but even as she watched, the tomo marks on his iris twitched slightly, and he shut his eyes with a groan. "I need a blindfold. Whatever the hell it is, it's messing with my chakra. I can't get my eyes to focus." Naruto looked down at his friend, frowning, then tapped him on the shoulder. "Do we need to quit, team? We can always kick some ass next time. Don't make me repeat myself, dope." Sasuke grinned slightly, until another spasm racked his body, causing him to clench his teeth, fighting down the urge to scream. After a moment, the spasm passed, and he unclenched, panting. "It's getting less frequent. I might walk out of here yet. Get the scroll. Kick some ass. Just don't take the whole team with you, He sighed in irritation. "I'll need some bodyguards until I can move." Shikamaru nodded from where he was standing. "We can split in half. I'll go out with." He stopped as Naruto stood quietly in the center of the small huddle. The blonde's eyes were sharp, angry, his teeth gritted. "I'll get our scroll." There was no room for argument in his voice, not the least bit of give. He turned to Shikamaru. "Turn this cave into a fortress, Shikamaru. I have enough manpower for this. Stay here and protect him." He turned to look at the one figure who was not in the huddle, the one person who had done nothing. "And her," he whispered quietly, his voice surprisingly gentle. Shikamaru nodded. Once released from the trap, Ino had rushed to find Sasuke, and when she did, she became inconsolable. In the last day, she had not eaten or drank, and the muffled sound of her crying was broken only by intermittent moments of sleep. Nobody had gotten a word out of her, not her teammates, not Sakura, nobody. No amount of recrimination would change anything, and it could easily make it worse. Still, it's surprising a knucklehead like Naruto would think of that, Shikamaru thought. I'll go with you, said Shino calmly. The Hyuga can keep watch here, and I can guide you to a group that are in poor condition, and thus would be better served being disqualified now instead of buried later. Naruto nodded, even as he bit down on his desire to let loose on his own. Letting your anger rule you is a stupid thing to do, Kakashi said to them once, and stupid shinobi die stupid deaths. Naruto wanted to lash out, to beat down every foe he could find, and he knew it was displaced anger at his teammates' suffering. And the most important part of that feeling was he knew it for what it really was, and in doing so, he could control his reaction. Go kick their ass, said Sasuke on the ground, panting slightly from the latest spasm. Chapter 24, Oh Make Break. Side bets are in. Kakashi sat quietly in the middle of the bar, pretending to sip sake through his mask and watching the crowd around him shuffle and grunt and yell with a small smile on his face. He was not a party sort of person, nor was he inclined to participate in large, crowded social events, but he could still appreciate them from the outside, as it were, especially when they pertained to the life of a shinobi. And one thing could be guaranteed, across every hidden village and every nation in the world, whenever 2 or more people compete, 3 or more people will be betting on the outcome. Kakashi actually enjoyed the betting system for the Chunin exams, specifically, that there was no system. Anyone could bet with anyone, for anything of value, be it money or goods or information. No betting laws were in place, at least not in Konohagakure, beyond the simple rule that to welch on a bet made in good faith was identical to theft, and treated accordingly, which in a hidden village populated mostly by shinobi, generally meant D-rank missions for the value of the debits, a strong incentive for any gambler to stay honest. So, every time the exams happened, Kakashi would grab a drink and sit quietly in the middle of the maelstrom. He never offered a bet, no matter how much others pressed. But he would accept bets offered to him, and in the process of playing hard to get, he generally got far better odds than he would get pursuing the same bets. As of yet, the only one who no longer fell for that trap within his small circle of friends and acquaintances was Kurenai, who made a bet with him exactly once, and never again. This year was special, however. This year, he had his own team in the running, made of 2 previously hopeless cases and a single genius with a reputation for being pig-headed. It helped that, with a village full of often bored shinobi, the local records office was filled with people trying to find an edge with public information, and Kakashi had not bothered to update the public files on his little genin squad since he began training them. He continued to stare towards the exit, watching the crowds outside mill about through the windows. He could feel the man approaching from a mile away, his heavy frame and uneven footfalls playing a song for Kakashi's ears on the carefully prepared floor. It was a bar in a hidden village, and if it wanted shinobi business, like most bars did, there were plenty of ways to keep track of your surroundings. Hey, aren't you Hatake Kakashi? Kakashi turned and smiled at the man, a slightly overweight, middle-aged male whose dress and manner told Kakashi all he needed to know. A shop owner, and based on his businesslike attire, some sort of general store owner. I am, he acknowledged amicably. You got that Uchiha kid, right? And the little weak pink girl and the thing, right? Kakashi carefully set his sake bottle down, lest he be tempted to use in an unusual manner, such as a bludgeon. This fellow was drunk enough to lose his discretion, which was never wise amongst shinobi, especially one you do not know well. Kakashi smiled to himself, and decided to make an example out of him. I have Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura, and the Thingkeeper himself, Uzumaki Naruto. PFFFFFT. The shopkeeper sat heavily across from Kakashi, pointing at him with one greasy finger, each hand movement sloshing some liquid on the table. I hear from the bookkeepers that they suck. That the girl is weak, and the thing spends all of his money on ramen because he's hungry, for blood. Muhaha. Kakashi kept his smile firmly in place. You'd spend all your money on ramen if you couldn't get anything better with the generous payout given to him, I bet. I cannot speak on personal matters at this time, honorable shopkeep. It would change the odds for all those betting. Terrible thing to do. Come on, if you believe in them, you'd bet on them. It's betting season. Kakashi shook his head, and the man leaned in. House a bet. I am willing to bet you 10,000 ryo per genin on your team. I pay for each kid who makes it to the final round. You pay for each kid who does not. Kakashi took a moment to look thoughtful, then shrugged. Do you have 30,000 ryo? I won't bet with someone who's no good for it. The man fumbled for his wallet, and Kakashi smiled under his mask. A shinobi is nothing if not observant, and Kakashi already knew the answer to this one, because the guy had loudly begged for the drink in his hand before approaching. When the man shook his head sadly, Kakashi took a thoughtful pose. Well, how does this sound? I give you 10,000 ryo per genin on my team who does not make it to the final. You offer me 10% off of merchandise for the next year for each genin that does make it. It took some haggling, and some artful encouragement from Kakashi, but the man eventually agreed to 5% per genin. Kakashi wrote out the contract and signed it, and let the man read it over and sign it, before tucking it into his vest, grinning like a thief, which he might as well be. When the man stumbled off to bother someone else, Kakashi pulled out the agreement and smiled as he reread it. I, Hatake Kakashi, while of sound mind, agreed to pay to Yasuike's the sum of 10,000 ryo per genin on my team who does not reach the final round in the current Chunin exam. I, Yasuike, while of sound mind, agreed to grant to Hatake Kakashi, in lieu of money, a 5% discount on all merchandise in my shop per genin who reaches the final round in the current Chunin exam, for 1 year after the end of the current Chunin exam. The above has been examined by both parties and found to be correct according to the terms of our bet. Without a formal betting system enforced by the village, bets were enforced by the community. A shopkeeper who dodged payment would quickly find that the local shinobi were quite adept at covert action, and cared very little for those who did not keep their word. To not follow through would be the same as throwing their business away. And when it came time to settle, the exact wording of the contract was followed. 10,000 per genin on my team versus 5% off per genin, period. The fine print matters, pal, and I have a genin who could use a hefty discount under my guise. He took another slip of paper out and made a few notes on it. Based on previous exams, he'd be getting a solid 40 to 50% off from the merchant for a year, depending on how many made it to the finals. I wonder if Naruto can figure out how to put Yasui-san out of business, reselling his merchandise at a solid profit. He tucked the note away for later consideration, maybe as a mental exercise for the boy. He needed to keep up appearances, after all, and one did not ponder one's bets while gleefully cackling if one is to appear unwilling to gamble. He'd had more than 15 people in the last few days make bets with him, and win or lose, he'd be ahead by the end. A few financial gains, but mostly social gains. He had bet Asuma his cigarettes for a month against seeing what was under his mask if all 3 of his genin made it to the finals, and he was quite looking forward to losing that bet if Asuma's team all made it, because the another mask routine was a surefire hit, and it was getting harder to find someone it worked on. In fact, Kurenai had choked on her drink when Asuma made that bet, but she kept it to herself, managing only a small smile when Asuma wasn't looking. He'd bet Guy, of course. This year, Guy insisted on betting for Kakashi to wear a suit similar to his own for a day, against having to wear one of his own suits, only 2 sizes smaller, for a day. Kakashi had carefully noted to himself that nothing in the bet said what day, or that he'd be seen in public on that day. He highly suspected that Guy would end up finding a woman finally after he lost that bet, although considering Kurenai had choked on her drink again at that one, maybe not. Once he stopped laughing over Naruto's stunt during the cheater's test. Marino Ibiki had bet that if Naruto made it to the final round, he'd eat his headband. Unlike most of those who bet with Kakashi, he had carefully reread the betting contract, after which he smirked, and wrote in a clause allowing him to remove the metal plate he had sewn into it. Against it, Kakashi had gotten a few days' worth of training time for the genin, and thankfully, Ibiki did not look nearly as close to that part of the bet. Or he let it go as worth doing, Kakashi thought. For all of his imposing manner, head interrogator Ibiki was as sociable and good-willed as most people, and it might well be that he saw value in training the next generation. Kakashi sensed another person approaching and grinned to himself. He had been waiting days for this, patiently waiting at a bar and putting on a show of not caring, solely to draw the attention of his foe. They passed him by several times over the last few days, and now they crept up quietly behind his chair, arms raised. Enko draped her arms over Kakashi from behind, frowning when he did not react to her sudden closeness. "What gave me away?" she asked, holding her place and pressing her chest against his back. They'd been playing this game for months now, and as of yet she had not managed to sneak up on the more experienced Jonin. "You avoided the front door, and made no sound on the floors, but 3 things gave you away." Kakashi pointed forward, and Enko leaned into him to follow his line of sight, coincidentally pressing herself even tighter against Kakashi. Her face went from a frown to a scowl when she realized he was pointing at the window, not through it. She could see their reflection on the glass clearly. "First, I was watching for you. Second, no matter where you go, people talk quietly when you pass, something I am sure can be attributed to your great personality." Enko grinned and tightened her grip on Kakashi. "I'm sure you didn't look at my great personality when you saw me coming up behind you either." Her mesh top did little to conceal her chest, nor did the long coat she wore open at all times, and Anko knew it was generally distracting to others, both for those who found her style uncouth, and for those who found the style not quite uncouth enough. She knew it, and Kakashi knew it, and for all that he played the part of the pervert, she had yet to catch him actually checking the goods. She wasn't sure if he was not looking out of respect, or he was just so good she didn't catch him at it, but even knowing the real contents of his ever-present book, she had her own ideas on the matter. It was a grand game, a battle of perversion between two of Konohagakure's most overtly inappropriate people, and the best part of the game was that nobody else really knew the rules, although they both suspected Kurenai had some idea what was going on. Anko did her best to make Kakashi look like a pervert. Kakashi did his best to make her look ineffective against even such a legendary pervert as himself, and both worked as hard as they could to make as many people uncomfortable as possible in the process. What fun! So, she said, leaning into his ear and speaking quietly. What was the third thing that gave me away? A dowsing rod? She nibbled his ear slightly and grinned to herself when she heard the sound of at least 2 glasses hitting the floor nearby. Nonsense, said Kakashi, leaning back and giving her a dull look. The third thing was, I knew you'd get desperate enough to approach me eventually. Anko sighed and sauntered around the table. She grabbed a chair and spun it around, smoothly straddling it and counting the scooting chairs and sudden held breaths as more than a few folks watched. I want to make a bet with you. Kakashi nodded politely for her to talk. For each student of yours who fails, I get to take 1 piece of clothing off of you. For every student who passes, you get to claim something of mine. She casually flicked her coat open and gave Kakashi a smile that was completely genuine, if only for the gratifying spit take one of the civilians behind him made when he saw that move. Kakashi shrugged. You're still trying to get my cloths off, I see. But why would I bet? You've been throwing yourself at me for weeks now. If you haven't got them off me yet, you're not getting them on a bet where I have no stakes. Maybe you should try someone who's more desperate than I am. A small circle opened around them, to the sound of every chair within reach being skillfully slid away, because it was a shinobi bar, which means that the clientele were usually aggressive, drunk, and more than willing to use their surroundings as weapons, and Anko had a reputation for all 3. Kakashi held up his hands peacefully, grinning under his mask. Here we go, this is going to be great. Kakashi was a good shinobi, and as such, his intelligence-gathering skills were excellent. He knew that Anko had met up with the other jonin who had teams in the exam, and he managed to learn where this bet was going before she approached him. He had spotted the other jonin in the crowd earlier as well, so the timing was perfect. He was about to make so many points in their little game. Ma, before you get all angry, how about a trade? Anko frowned, little warning bells going off in her head. What trade? We split the average. You give me 2 items of clothing, and I'll give you 2. Right here and now. Anko's eyes narrowed. They had agreed that they could not do anything during their games that Kakashi was unwilling to do in front of his students, which means no making him strip down in public, nor him doing the same to her. But not demanding her cloths after this bet would break character, which was also against the rules of their game. She smelled a trap, but backing down would also break character. Damn him. She smiled as a thought occurred to her. If we're doing this publicly, I think the public should have a say. I think they are permitted to vote on what I take off of you. And I am sure they'll all agree with what I take off you, in the end, Anko-san. Deal, she said, pulling her coat back to give the Kakashi, and the crowd, a show. Take your pick. Kakashi looked carefully at her, a single slow once over. To be fair, most of the males and at least a few of the females in the room were doing the same, but Kakashi was doing it as if searching for weapons. Your kunai holster, he said with a smirk, to the sound of many folks in the bar groaning in frustration. Shit, thought Anko. She knew that smirk. Kakashi thought he had one up on her, and the sad truth was, when he got like that, he often did. But if she had to lose, she'd get as many points as she could in the process. She lifted her leg, raising it much higher than she had to, and set it on the table to undo her kunai holster, carefully giving herself plenty of time in that pose while the crowd shuffled around to get a good look. She set the holster on the table and slowly lowered her leg. And what else? She said, setting her hands on her hips. Your weapons pouch. The bar grumbled and cussed as she removed her secondary pouch from her back and set it on the table too. There were no saucy movements for her to make there, and she didn't even try. Whatever his trap was, she must have fallen into it, because he was still smirking, although she had no idea why he wanted her disarmed. Hell with it, at least I'll make it a Pyrrhic victory for him. She turned to the crowd, sweeping her coat out and open, and bowed to them. So, having just disappointed you so much, now it is time for your revenge. What shall we remove first? There was one shouted answer that dominated every other. More than a few called for his forehead protector, and a few more, including many of the women in the bar, called for his pants. But above them both was the call from every jonin and chunin in the bar, and they called for his mask. Of course, Kakashi thought cheerfully to himself. Boy oh boy, it's going to be a good night. Kakashi smiled and shrugged. Very well, the rules are the rules. If you really want to know, I wear this mask because, behind it, there is a secret. He reached up and hooked his finger into his mask, then pulled it down to reveal another mask. It was a credit to his efforts that most of the shinobi in the room said it with him, many of them with the weary chuckle of someone seeing the same amusing joke for the 10th time. But Kakashi distinctly heard the sound of Asuma shouting in confusion. By the way, he calmly called out casually, you have now cheated me of my stakes for our bet, Asuma-san. I know this was a setup. I suggest you get your smokes in now, because you're taking a little break after the exams. The crowd laughed, and Kakashi caught sight of Kurenai pumping her fist in victory. Enko shook her head and turned to the crowd, without theatrics. The next part was painfully obvious, if you knew Kakashi. And the crowd fell for it. His other mask. They shouted, and while many of the jonin in the crowd tried to shout them down, the chunin and civilians far outnumbered them. Enko sighed and turned to Kakashi. Very well, take off your other ma. His voice trailed off at the look of horror wrote on Kakashi's face. He looked deeply uncomfortable, and his one visible eye was pleading. No way, she thought. Kakashi took a moment to swallow, and turned to the crowd. The rules are the rules. As much as it bothers me, I'll take off my mask. But first, I ask that we close the blinds over the windows. I don't want this to leave this room. The various patrons rushed forward, sliding the thick wooden blinds down to block off the view of the street. As they did so, Enko watched Kakashi closely. He made no hand signs, he made no move at all, he simply stood quietly, his face pale and drawn. No way, she thought again. As the crowd gathered around, Kakashi looked at Enko. Are you sure you want this? He asked her quietly, his voice subdued. I know you wanted to get my mask off in private. Won't this rob you of that victory? Enko grinned at him. I can't believe it. Rules are rules, you said, Kakashi. And I think you weren't prepared for this after all. You should have gone for a henge when people were distracted. She would have even let him get away with it for fun. She actually felt a little bad at instigating this. But he overplayed his hand, and now he'd have to pay. It's time to see what's really behind your mask, Kakashi. Do it. Kakashi let out a deep sigh, then raised a shaking hand to his mask. The entire crowd leaned in, and the room went still, everyone holding their breath at this chance to witness the birth of a legend, the tale of how a single bet had revealed the infamous face of Hatake Kakashi. He hooked his finger into his mask, and his one eye turned to Enko. He gave her a wink and a smile, and her jaw dropped. You bastard. He pulled, revealing a dark green piece of cloth. Oh look, he said, grinning at Enko. Another mustache. It was worth it. Even when Enko threw him out of window, the wooden blind slats preventing the glass from cutting Kakashi too much. Even when the crowd chased him, through the streets for the civilians, and over the rooftops for the shinobi. Even when the barkeep presented Kakashi the repair bill, after those who stayed behind trashed the place. Apparently, Enko had still been really angry, and stools were shockingly expensive. Even when Enko chewed him out later for being such a jerk, although she was laughing at the time. 12 years. He'd waited 12 years for someone to get to the third mask. And to get to reveal it in front of a massive crowd like that. It was worth it.